Are we live? I think we're live. Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday, the 13th of June, and we are live to you from our homes to your homes for the fourth Diverse Ed event. We were due to be in Liverpool this morning, but obviously we're not in Liverpool. We are instead all over the country. But what it has meant is that we have got 600 people booked to join us, and lots more people joining us via social media. We've got people from Jamaica who've not gone to bed because they want to listen to us. We've got people who are staying up in the East. It's absolutely fantastic that you've all joined us. The beauty of technology is we are also going to be recorded forevermore to be on YouTube. And the DfE is emailed this morning and they are going to be watching this video as part of their learning journey. So it's fantastic to have you all here. Just to set the scene, diversity is the word of the moment, but we need the word diversity to be meaningful and not meaningless. We need diversity to be symbolic. We need the context of what is going on in the world right now to be seen and to be listened to. It is undeniable in the last few months with Black Lives Matters, with the transphobic hate on Twitter, and with the rise in domestic abuse that protected characteristics are more important now than ever before. We need to spotlight what is going on in the world. So much for British values, we need to be thinking about global human values. So much for tolerance, we need to think acceptance. So this event is about celebration, not toleration. This event is about listening, learning, and leaning in. It is about showing up, standing up, and speaking out. It is about awareness, agency, and action. It is fantastic you are here. As you listen and learn and reflect today, please do so through three lenses. Lens one, yourself, the individual. What can you do? Lens two, our schools, our staff and our students and our communities. What can we collectively do? Lens three, society. How can we make our world a better place for all of us to coexist? I'm really excited about our brilliant lineup. It is hard. They all had an hour and they've condensed it down to 5 minutes. So it is going to be headlines of key messages, but I'm hoping the conversation will carry on social media. People will blog and people will take this information back to their schools. Just read tweets. There's going to be a lot of traffic. Please, can you help us streamline the traffic? If it is a general comment or reflection, please tag in Diverse Ed 2020. If it's a question for one of the panelists, because at the end of each input, there'll be some questions, please direct those questions to Ethical Leader and they will come through to us in the studio. So without further ado, session one is about the landscape, what is going on nationally when it comes to diversity and inclusion. We have four fantastic speakers sat before me, and hopefully you can see them on your screen. We have Alana Gay, the co-founder of BAME Ed and one of the only women of colour who is a head teacher in a private school in the country. We have Alison Creel, one of the first BAME CEOs of a group of schools, and now a consultant and a strategy lead for Women Ed. We have Daniel Gray, one of the co-founders of LGBT Ed, and we have Elizabeth Wright, a Paralympian, a disability consultant and activist. What an amazing way to kick off the day. I'm going to mute myself now and hand over to Alana to put rockets up backsides. Over to you, Alana.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and welcome to everybody who's here this morning, and thank you for joining us all. So let me tell you a bit about the BAME Ed journey and where we are and what we've been doing so far. I mean, we're very popular at the moment. We're on trend. And I'm going to say on trend because when it comes to dealing with ethnic minority issues, it seems like we have to be on trend. So at this point, there's a lot happening around us that all has to do with ethnic minorities and how we are being developed, how racism works in our society, whether or not we should topple statues. All of this is meaningless if nothing further comes from it. So it's not about what is happening now, is what will happen and what change will you make happen when all of this is over. And that's what BAME Ed is about. So at BAME Ed, we look at what would it look like when we are genuinely all equal, when I don't have to say things like Black Lives Matter to highlight the issues of Black lives. Later on, Asian Lives Matter to highlight those issues that Asian people are facing, or even Gypsy Roma Traveler Lives Matter, because this is also their History Month. When those things don't need to happen anymore, that we bring focus into every single group, then we will know that we have achieved what BAMED has set out to achieve. And it's not just about what BAMED is here to do. It's not just about what we do right now. It's about what are the steps that we need organizations to take. So we spend a lot of time collaborating with organizations, because when you come under a general banner of BAME, there are so many different issues to deconstruct that it's not just one, so it's just not just unitary. So we might be one unit, but we definitely are not a singularity. There are many different issues that we need to tackle. So some of the simple things that we've undertaken in this current time, we will know that we are no longer needed when we don't have to put out BAME specific COVID-19 risk assessments, and advise schools that as much as you're going to do a general risk assessment for your school, you also need to look specifically at the fact that if you're from the BAME community, you are more likely to contract and to die from this disease, and looking at the social and medical reasons why that is more likely to happen. We won't have to battle on things like policies. So you will say to your school, if you have a hair policy that is going to discriminate against Black African hair to a different extent, that will be something that will be removed from our education system. Even in looking at small things like behavior, it's not enough to say, well, there are some groups, gypsy travelers, they don't really achieve, Black children, then Black Caribbean boys not really doing well. Interrogate your data to examine why and take the steps to make that change happen. We're not looking just for the quick fix. We're looking for the long-term change that makes education in the UK something for everyone. And that comes not from this BAME community, but it has to come by bringing our white colleagues along. So to my white colleagues, I'm going to say to you, the best thing you can do for us and the best thing you can do to make education into that equitable system that we all want it to be, would be not just about what am I sensing, but think about what am I doing? This is your call to action. This is not your time to come here and listen and say, oh yeah, solidarity, I really understand. Black Lives Matter is a slogan. What we're looking for is an action. And all of my colleagues here, we're looking for the actions that will come, the change that needs to come. And unless all of my white colleagues listening right now are here and present and ready to commit to being a part of that action, to accepting that some of the power that you have, some of the institutions, some of the structures that we have in place need to change. Simple changes. Change the history curriculum, change the books you're reading inside of your classroom, add more diverse literature into your classroom, discuss what is happening out in society with the students that are in your area. Nudge someone and tell them, actually, there's this training program, not a deficit model training program, but here's a master's, why don't you go sign up for that? Here's your NPQs, why don't you go sign up for that? Here is an opportunity for you to advance your career. Why don't you take that chance? I will coach you through. So it's not just about what's happening in the moment, it's about what we're going to do in the long-term future. And listen to those experiences of racism. I always say, Hannah, that when I think about people saying, oh, you're playing the race card, every time I see that, I feel pain inside, because the amount of thought that goes into me or anyone considering the experience, the amount of reflection that they have on that experience that they're having before they say, actually, that was racist. And then just to be told, oh, you're playing the race card. Dismissed. And there's nothing worse in our schools where teachers have experienced racism from their students, from their colleagues in the staff room, to have the senior leadership turn around and say, you're just playing the race card. They didn't mean it like that. You need to grow thicker skin. So when we think of education in the UK and what we want to have next, we need to think about, well, who are the students that we're preparing for the future, and what's the future we're preparing them for? Join BAMED, have a look on our website. We feature speakers. So one of the pledges you can make today is do not participate in all white panels, whether the diversity comes from having white women on the panel alongside white men, but do not participate in any event that does not reflect the diversity. Shockingly enough, there are experts in every field that have ethnic minorities in them. Every field you can find an ethnic minority speaker. Every field you can find an LGBTQ speaker. Every field you can find someone with who would declare themselves as having a disability, who can be an expert in that field. Do not limit your experiences, and do not allow others to limit your experiences to thinking that it's a niche market where we can't find someone. BayMed has a network of speakers that you can have a look at, and if you are ethnic minority, please do put your name forward. Just look at what you can do in order to support your colleagues. Sign up to be a mentor. There's a woman leading in education. They could do with more Bay mentors. BayMed also runs a mentoring system. Why don't you sign up to be a coach? Sign up to train others. Diversity and inclusion, especially when it comes to racism and ethnicity, cannot be a fad. And I cannot sit here and say that the only time we are a fad is when one of us experiences severe trauma. We cannot have an education system and a society where it's only by watching one man die over the course of 8.5 minutes that we decide, oh, that was bad, maybe we should say something. It's about in those quiet moments when you're sitting around the dinner table and someone in your guest party says something racist, you say something then. And if you can do that, then please come join us in BayMed, because this is all going to be a part of the journey that we take together to make change happen in our society. Hannah?
Alana, thank you so much. So powerful. So many compelling messages there. And I've written down loads of things for myself to reflect on as well. I think the kind of it's an action, not a slogan. It's really, really important. And I'm seeing a lot on Twitter about being anti-racist and not non-racist. We need action, not passivity. So thank you so much. And questions to Alana, please put them into the thread. I made a mistake. The question should be on Periscope, please, not on Twitter, and they'll come directly into the studio. Before I hand over to Liz Wright, who's going to talk about disability awareness, I need to do an apology. We would ideally have had a BSL translator for this. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it work with the tech. But when we do the recording on YouTube, we'll make sure it's subtitled to make sure that the recording is inclusive for everybody. So I'm going to hand over to Liz now to talk about what we can do to raise awareness for disability.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Thank you so much for asking me to be involved again, Hannah. I really, really loved attending Diverse Ed last year, or earlier this year, I should say. And I'm really excited today to contribute, hopefully in a really positive way, and inspire people to think about how they can raise disability awareness in their schools. When Hannah asked me to still be involved and do 5 minutes, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What am I going to talk about? And she actually asked me to talk about some grassroots action that I've taken recently in the Shape of a Change.org campaign. So a few weeks ago, I happened to wake up one morning, as you do, as I think most of us do, leapt onto Twitter to check out what everyone was doing that morning. And I noticed something that was really made me angry, really upset. And I could see that for the disability community on Twitter, that they were really upset about this. And it was something that was happening on TikTok, which I'm sure hopefully most of us are aware of this social media platform. I know that a lot of teens and young people definitely use TikTok a lot to kind of make videos where they dance to music and stuff like that. And what I was seeing on Twitter was that there was an autism challenge that had been going on for, I think, a few days or about a week or something like that. And what was happening with that was that people were making videos where they were mocking people with autism, not just autism, but also physical disabilities. And the videos that I saw were really upsetting. I could only watch them once. It was really hurtful. And in that moment, with that feeling of anger, I just thought I have to do something about this. And I think that's what drives a lot of us. It's when we see something that is just really painful to watch. You know, I mean, Alana kind of touched on it a bit in her bit where she spoke about why should it just be that one moment in time that makes us take action. But in this case, for me, as a disability activist, this was almost like the final straw. So I started this change.org petition, which was about tackling the discrimination and bullying that was appearing on TikTok, and the fact that they were taking days to literally take these videos down, which wasn't right. It's a petition that's gained over 1,000 signatures and been shared over 500 times, and it's still gaining signatures, even though there has, to some degree, been some resolve to the situation. In other words, they have taken down the autism challenge videos, which is absolutely brilliant. But kind of looking at it, I think what doing this petition really did for me was to consider the issues from a broader perspective and look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that TikTok as a social media platform does have policies that are there to protect protected characteristics, but they're not enacting them potentially in the most efficient and best way to actually prevent these kind of videos being taken off. And it can be the same across other social media platforms as well. The other thing that came to light when I was actually working on this petition was the fact that TikTok were also censoring certain people who were on TikTok. So definitely around disability, there has been censoring of videos by disabled people. So alongside with the algorithms and stuff like that, it's called shadow banning. They actually suppress those videos from being seen by other people. And the reading that I've done about that is because if it's something isn't attractive or seen or considered attractive or considered aspirational, then it's something that they don't want to promote on their platform, which is essentially a form of censoring the content that is out there. And it wasn't just disabled people that they were kind of focusing this on, but also people that moderators deemed ugly, which is a really awful thing to say, but that is what I've been reading, as well as people who are overweight. So it's kind of this strange censoring that they have on this platform that I think in terms of bigger picture really speaks to that kind of discrimination and bullying that is not being fully addressed on that as a platform. But to kind of bring this further onto how schools can kind of help with this kind of situation is to very rightly come back to that point that I made earlier, that it's a lot of teens that actually use TikTok. And I see it as a two-pronged approach that has to be done to deal with this discrimination and bullying against disabled people. It's about looking at the social media platforms and the policies that they have and how they actually enact them and enforce them on their platforms. But it is also raising disability awareness in schools so that these teens or young people that are actually creating these videos understand that it is wrong and therefore might not create the videos in the first place. So for me, I think it's definitely something that I would ask all of you guys to think about is actually how much disability awareness do you have going on in your school? And this isn't about looking at and focusing on SEND students. I'm actually talking about your non-disabled students, how you are actually teaching them about disability and disability awareness, and introducing them to actually the lived experience and the reality of what disability is, as opposed to paying into those stereotypes that are so entrenched throughout society around disability. So I think, again, coming back to Alana made a point about it's looking at your curriculum. And I think it's a similar line with disability as well. You have to really look at how your curriculum is structured and how much you are actually including perhaps disability stories in your curriculum or role models, or how you're actually raising that discussion. Are you bringing in people with different disabilities to give talks to your students so that they're actually meeting people? Because I know for a lot of non-disabled people, I ask them, do you know anyone with a disability? And a lot of people will go, oh, no, I don't. Or, oh, my uncle has a prosthetic leg or something like that. It's very kind of almost like a one-dimensional understanding of what disability is, but disability is a lot deeper. We have so many types of disabilities, and I think people have to understand that. So I realise I've probably got about 30 seconds left, so I'll quickly wrap up, Hannah. What I will say is, in terms of pledging today, what I would love for you to think about is disability awareness. So what I would ask is that you consider pledging to raise awareness of disability in your school to tackle bullying and discrimination, not just in your school of disabled students, but the wider perspective and experience of the disability community. And to help you with that, I'm actually developing some disability awareness packs. And I've promised Hannah that I would allow everyone who's kind of attended this, which I know is kind of blown out a lot, but you'll be able to access it for free. So I think the easiest way for me to do that would be to pop, once I've completed it and it's all polished, to pop it up on my website so you can download it and have access to that. So thank you, Hannah.
Brilliant, thank you, Liz. And I love the segue from Alana's piece about the call to action and being active to you modelling how to actually take action yourself, because I think people want to help but don't always know how to help. And I think what you've modelled there is you saw something you didn't like and you've talked us through what you actually did to challenge it. Similarly, this morning I saw another all-white panel for a global event, and I've helped someone in Canada write a response to challenge that, Alana. So I think it's that, what can we all individually do to contribute? And I think just read that awareness piece around disability, it's the hidden disabilities as well, isn't it? It's not everything's visible, and you don't actually know who in your staff team has got a disability. I find it staggering how much data we have on our children and how little data we have about our staff. I'm going to hand over next then to Dan, who's going to talk us about LGBT Ed and what they've been up to.
Morning, everyone. Hello. A lot of what I wanted to say has been said much better than I ever would. So thank you for that, ladies, which means mine's going to be very short. Can I start by saying thanks for inviting us again today, Hannah. LGBT Ed would not exist without the support of you and also all of our Diverse Ed colleagues. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here. I also want to say that we stand with our trans community, especially in light of the recent high-profile transphobia, and of course, with our BAME community. This week was also the 4th anniversary of the terrorist attack on the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. So our thoughts are with the families of the victims. I hope that these events make us more passionate than ever about delivering a fair and more equal society. And hopefully these past few weeks might be a turning point towards change. I think we have to continue to be optimistic where we can. Just to give you a little bit about LGBT Ed, how we started and where we're at. We're a network to empower LGBT plus teachers to be visible and authentic in their workplaces for the benefit of LGBT young people. We also need allies, though, and these are people who aren't LGBT, to lead on this in their schools. So we're looking for as many people to come forward as possible to get involved, and you don't have to be LGBT to work here, but it helps. We are delighted to formally launch today. We have some quite exciting news for you, to formally launch our new partnership with the Centre for LGBTQ+ Inclusion in Education at Leeds Beckett University. And we'll be working more closely together from now on a wide programme of activities and CPD. We'll have CPD for schools to develop LGBT+ inclusion going live as distance learning from September. And there will be a discount. Can you put a little flashing something on the screen? There'll be a discount if they mention LGBT Ed when they apply. That training includes, sorry, my cat has just wandered in. This training will include LGBT governor training, training for LGBT leads in school, trans inclusion in PE, which is completely unique as a course, and also we're running a kite mark and an award. And I will put details in the chat on the thread on Twitter for all the email addresses and everything for you to get in touch with. Any questions during today about this partnership can go to Rachel Bostwick from the centre, again, whose email I will put in the chat. And also Hannah Jepson, who is the other co-founder and director of LGBT Ed. She's going to be here all day. She's a lead coach on the award that we're running. And I'll put all email addresses, as I said, later on in the thread. A couple of other things just to go through.
I think Dan's just left the studio rather than unmuted himself. Easily done. Is he back? Here he is. Okay, we are live and we are going to make mistakes. Dan, that was classic. I'm glad it was you and not me. You picked it up smoothly. Back over to you.
Hello. Yes, we are live. These things do happen. Welcome back. A couple of things. We had our soft launch, if you remember, at the very first Diverse Ed conference. And then we had a formal launch on the 2nd of June 2018. And since then, we have done some fantastic things. We've led 2 cohorts of our Proud Leadership course. 75% of the cohort have since achieved some kind of promotion in their schools, which is fantastic. We are running a pilot of the LGBT Ed one-day leadership event on Saturday, the 27th of June. The aim was for that to be in the north of England. Of course, it's now going to be online, but we are following requests now, able to branch out a bit more across the country. There's details about that post on our Twitter page. Each of these comes with 2 hours of free coaching and mentoring. Plus, we have every Thursday evening at 7:30, run by Nick Bentley, who's our London ambassador. He runs the LGBT Ed Chat, the hashtag LGBT Ed Chat, Thursday at 7:30. What we need now, though, from everybody is, can you help us be the best we can be? We're still looking for volunteers from across the spectrum, including BAME and those with disabilities, to join our steering group. We want to recruit a total of about 6 people, and we want to make sure that we're making the best decisions we can make about how we move forward in order to be as inclusive as possible. So please email hannah.jepson@lgbted.uk. But again, I will put that in the Twitter feed and the chat, etc. hannah.jepson@lgbted.uk. Plus, I'm editing the very first LGBT Ed book called Big Gay Adventures in Education. And it's coming out very soon, containing a collection of positive stories of out teachers and some pupils of out teachers who have contributed to the book as well. If you want to get involved, please get in touch via the website, lgbted.uk. We have a mailing list. You can email me. Again, I will put all the details in the thread. And, well, we especially want to hear from you if you've got money. That'd be great. Thank you very much for listening. And I think we should pledge today to be the role models we needed when we were at school. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. And very smoothly done. You're getting lots of compliments on Twitter about modelling how humanistic and authentic we are as leaders. They actually thought it was pre-recorded. You were all being so polished. So well done for taking that in your stride. I think what I'm most excited to hear is that from work started 5 years ago in the grassroots space, the system is listening. And we've got people leaning in as partners who are working with us. And I think it's great what happens in the grassroots space. When we start working with partners in the system, that is when we're going to really accelerate the progress and the change we want to see in our schools. So fantastic partnerships there. And I think a big shout out to Leeds Beckett. They do support a lot of the grassroots community. So thank you very much, Leeds Beckett. Our final speaker for this morning's piece about landscaping is Alison Krill. And if you didn't see the event that she co-organised midweek, Campus Support for Women, I'll share that link with you all as well. Over to you, Alison. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so rubbish at tech. But anyway, it's really nice to be collaborating with you again, Hannah. I've been part of Diverse Ed for a few years now, and I make no secret of the fact that it's one of my favourite things that I like to be a part of. So I'm going to talk about 3 things really, really quickly. And the first reason why Hannah asked me to come and talk today is to talk about the work that we're doing at Women Ed. So we've got 4, we've always had 3 campaigns, which was increased representation of women in leadership roles, reducing the gender pay gap, and also advocating for flexible working practices. And this is what this has been the main body of the work that Women Ed have been doing since they started 5 years ago. I'm the newbie in the strategic lead team, and you can imagine it's me. So I have been pushing for the fact that Women Ed is not representative of all women in the UK. And now we're moving globally. It's going to be an even bigger thing. So this is going to be at the heart of what I intend to do. And so I'm very pleased to say that at our 5th birthday party at the beginning of May, we launched the 4th campaign, which is increased representation of BAME women in leadership. I have to say at the moment, it is work that the strategic work is happening. It's not happened yet. I'm not saying we're doing it, but this is the heart of what we're going to be focusing on this year. It is going to be about inclusion overall. So next year, the focus might be a different group, but we will continue to work on increased representation of BAME women in leadership. It's a critical thing to be doing because of the head teachers in this country, 97% are white. That means there are only 3% of all head teachers are BAME, and it's less than 1% who are women. Now that is not okay. That is not okay. And we, Women Ed, can spearhead this work, but it's actually up to every single school governing body to look at what they are doing around senior leadership, especially around inclusion of BAME women. I'm tired already. It's only been 2 weeks, and I'm tired already of hearing Black women need to step up. Black women are stepping up. You guys are not listening to us, you're not seeing us, and you need to start doing something about that. So that is what we were going to be doing. I have to say that when you go beyond headship, it gets even worse. I am a little bit tired of seeing a model where we have executive heads who are white and we have head of schools who are BAME women. That tells me that you are quite happy for BAME women to do all the work, but not get paid properly, not get the job description that they are entitled to have. So please sort it out. When you look beyond that, as a CEO, I can remember going to 2 events, one in Islington where I walked out in the end because I was tired of people asking me who I was representing. And then I went to a women-only CEO event organised by the DFE. Nothing was said. It was great. The inclusion team and everyone else was there. Nothing was said about the fact that I was the only Black woman in the room. And at the end, I went up to a group of regional leads and asked them why they didn't say anything about BAME women leaders at a CEO level. And what I was told was we didn't even realize we had a BAME CEO. That must never, ever happen again. And I know we're back in that position already. And I would, if the DFE are watching, it's up to you to change that. So that's the main thing. The work from Women Ed, the work that Women Ed have been doing on their 4th campaign, kind of became a bigger issue in the around the time we were seeing the huge and horrendous crimes which are going on in the US. Please don't sit back and think it's all US and it's not happening over here. It's happening here. It is completely happening here all of the time. We walk it every single day. I got distressed because nobody was speaking out at all. And so I ended up in this wonderful collaborative group with Hannah, with Penny from BAME Ed, with Angie from Nourished School, and with Amy from LGBT Ed. And we put together in less than a week a webinar which was specifically a collaborative support group for women. It kept selling out. It was meant to be 50 people, and then it was 100 people, and then it was 500 people, and it went on and on. So we know that there is a need, and from that, I've now set up a talking circle. I know that there are so many people who are contacting me. I haven't got time to be able to support everyone, but there is wisdom within our group. So yesterday, I put out a tweet saying that I've set up the talking circle, which is for men and for women who are BAME to come together to support each other because we've got wisdom within the group. So I'm going to duck out now because I'm conscious of the fact, am I over time? I've got 1 minute. I've got 1 minute. So can I just end up by saying to you that the work of anti-racism, the work of becoming a better human to other humans, it is not something that, it's not a value that I want to see laminated on anyone's badges, please. It's not something, I don't want to hear about anti-racism weeks in any school or anti-racism months. This is something that you walk and you talk every single day. Anti-racism is about being anti-racist. It is not a tokenistic gesture. So if I see any school saying that anti-racism is one of their values and I see it laminated, I know you're not anti-racist. If I hear of any school saying we're having an anti-racist week, I know that you are not anti-racist. It means that you're tokenistic. So if I hear about schools doing anti-racism, I'm going to shout it out. So I'm looking forward to beginning to shout out. Thank you very much, Hannah, for the opportunity.
Wow, okay, if that's not a call to arms, people, that's 4 people giving you so many ideas about what's wrong, clarifying what we need to do, but actually tangible things to do as well. We are struggling to get the questions through. So I'm going to freestyle the questions, but if you want to put questions onto Periscope or on Twitter, Hannah, Jepson and Audrey are trying to get the questions to me in the studio. So one of the questions that is coming up is about mental health and the impact of not only COVID on people of colour and people with protected characteristics, but just, we've talked about authenticity. How can we support the mental health of people in our schools? Because there's some comments coming through that people are having to lie about what is creating their mental health conditions. Would any of you want to put your hand up and just speak to the relationship between protected characteristics and mental health? Thank you, Dan.
The very little research that exists, there is some, but the very little research that exists suggests that young LGBT people are at a significantly higher risk of self-harm. I think the statistic is that half of trans people have self-harmed, and half of those have actually succeeded in suicide. And that is frightening. And we know, as young LGBT people, having grown up into adults, we know what it's like at school to not feel accepted. And we know what it's like to constantly be picked on or bullied or victimized just because of who you are. That has a significant, huge impact on your mental health. And people go through life needing to get therapy and support after what's happened. So by enabling teachers to be visible and authentic LGBT role models, what we are doing is we are allowing those young people to feel like they identify with someone, to feel that other people are okay with people being gay, to know that other people are different and are okay with it. And it creates an enormous sense of safety and well-being that otherwise they wouldn't have. And we focus so much on curriculum in schools, but what we're trying to do is create human beings and send them out into the world as well-rounded, kind, thoughtful human beings. If they can't even feel safe and welcome in school, how can they access a curriculum?
I would say from an ethnic minority perspective, I'd say, first of all, look at what you decide to share. So there's a lot of people who, especially within this frame of time, come to their Black colleagues and say, how do you feel about George Floyd? Now, when you think about that, you're asking that person to reflect again on that experience after seeing the video multiple times, hearing it constantly in the news. Think about how you feel about that, and then tell me so that I can then go on to explain it to someone else. So I think if you want to protect the mental health of some of your BAME colleagues, then, or your Black colleagues specifically in this matter, then you need to make sure that you're not recreating the trauma for them. You're not just rehashing the same pain again, because I'm sure that speaking even just about the autism challenge would recreate that trauma for our disabled colleagues. So we need to think about what we share and the questions we ask. Secondly, when we're thinking about mental health, it's also good for people to take moments to reflect on their own mental health and be honest about it. In the Black community, mental health still holds a stigma that it really shouldn't. And I know in other ethnic minorities communities that if you speak out and say, actually, I don't feel well within myself at this point in time, the reaction that you get from others sort of makes you feel that you are less than a human or less than the person that you are. And that stigma really needs to be worked on and needs to be removed.
Thank you, Dan and Alana. Okay, Liz, do you want to go? And then Alison, I've got another question for you. So you go for it, Liz.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly say that kind of in recent, the way the disability movement is growing is that actually mental illness and mental health is starting to fall under this umbrella of disability. And I think the context of that is because I noticed that K Sunray 3 actually made a comment about finding the term disability really difficult, but I just wanted to very quickly explain that actually saying that I'm a disabled person isn't placing the idea of disability on my body, but actually on society, that it is society that disables me. And from the perspective of mental health and mental illness, I think that what that is saying is that we have a social structure that isn't fit to actually deal properly with mental health issues. And so we actually have to look at these social structures and how we actually support people with mental health issues and mental illness, not just in schools, but on that wider perspective of community as well, so that we can have accessibility and inclusion for people who maybe have bipolar or depression or anxiety or whatever their mental health or mental illness actually looks like. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Liz. And ultimately, we know that mental health and wellbeing was in a crisis in the country before lockdown, and lockdown has just completely exacerbated that. And we do need to be strategic. We need to be thinking about how are we going to aid the transition of children and staff going back into our schools. And mental health needs to be upfront and foremost in our thinking about the return to schools. So I've got another question for Alana here. We've got a question from somebody who's a BAME female middle leader who's asking for some advice about how to advance to senior leadership.
Oh, right. The best way to advance in senior leadership, especially if you don't have that full experience, is to have a mentor or a coach. That is a person who will look objectively at you within your situation and will give you advice on the things that you don't see about yourself. So lots of leaders or potential leaders have this sort of blindness, and I think, oh, I'm not experienced enough. And I think women, I do a lot of work on that. I'm not experienced enough. I don't know enough. What should I be doing next? Oh, I don't think I'm ready yet. And your coach is able to help you get past that level of blindness. Secondly, your coach is also able to give you a structure and give you an experience. There are lots of headship. I remember going for headship interviews and deputy headship and all of those interviews. And before you step into one, it is a mystery because there's so much secrecy around recruitment in the UK that we don't necessarily need. So I would say that your coach is able to help you through that. And lastly, have a group around you that are your support group, because there is a lot of rejection that happens in the BAME community. I was rejected tons of times before I actually got to the position where I am now. And you need to have those friends in the community who are going to help you dust you off and tell you, come on, we're going to try again. Let's do this time.
Thank you, Alana. Great feedback there. Alison, quick question here about how someone can get involved with Women Ed in Scotland. Who's the best person to contact?
There is Women Ed Scotland, but if you want to become involved with Women Ed, then start off by just looking at most of the communication is through Twitter. There's also a website which is womened.org, but then each of Women Ed is then split down into different regions, and it is changing. So we've just launched Women Ed England, and there is already a Women Ed Scotland and a Women Ed Northern Ireland and Women Ed Wales. So just come in, join us. And if you're just part of the bigger movement for now, that's fine. We've got the same messages. We want to see more women in leadership irrespective of their culture. We want to see women leaders in our schools.
Thank you. I'm going to finish with one question that all four of you can take it in turns to answer before we go to a coffee break. Right, so just thinking about where the power in the system lies and where the decision making lies, we know that we've got an issue with male, pale and stale boards and trusts, and also governing bodies and also SLTs. What is one message that each of you want those people to hear about what they need to do? So Alana, do you want to go first, please?
My message is be deliberately different. Pick someone that doesn't fit the mold. Pick someone whose history and background tells you that they've been a scrap and they've fought for everything that they got, because they're the people with the resilience, they're the people who've had the experience, and they're the ones who are able to help the rest of your board drive and see change. So be deliberate in picking someone who is different.
Liz, what would you like to add?
What I would add is not to assume, kind of looking specifically at disability, there's so much assumption made about what you can and can't do. And actually disabled people are the people that know their bodies and their minds the best. So don't make assumptions about people's abilities and what they can or can't do. Actually just talk to them and discuss with them about, being able to do that job or this job, and what reasonable adjustments can actually be made to support them in being able to achieve that.
Thank you, Liz. Dan, what do you think?
Don't say that you represent your community and that you're an inclusive school if your headship team can't even do that. So if there's 4 people at the top and all of them are white straight men, then you're basically lying. So please, please be more thoughtful in your appointments, and don't be put off when someone comes to you and starts talking about the work they've done in the LGBT field or the BAME field and thinking it might challenge your status quo or your sense of privilege. Embrace those people and make us feel welcome in your schools.
Alison, final words from you, please.
Thank you. I love that, Dan. I would say to anyone at a very senior level making these decisions, check your bias. We all have them. Check your bias. And we know that we tend to appoint people who look like us, but by staying in your comfort zone, it limits you, but actually makes you a really bad leader, because you're also limiting your entire community. We know there's loads and loads of research that shows the more diverse your team, the more successful you'll be. So if you want to lead a highly successful school, and you want those children to be the best humans, the best global citizens, so then have a diverse team so that you together can lead the school to even greater success. If you want the success, you'll have a diverse team.
And my final comment, thank you, Alana, for bringing that to my attention. We need to pledge collectively to go and be governors. The only way we're going to change the face of school leadership is if we change the face of school governance. And if we infiltrated every governing body in the country with people of colour, with people from different sexualities, with people with disabilities, just think about how we could change the face of the education system. And moreover, we also need to consider who is doing the recruitment into the education system. We need to diversify our ITE recruitment processes, and we need to make sure that the curriculum for our PGCE students is robust and meaningful and has diversity and inclusion at its heart. We have run 4 minutes over, but what a way to start the day. All I'm going to say is that I love and respect all 4 of you so much. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Lots and lots of learning, lots and lots of reflecting. It's now on the people who are watching us to go away and do the action. Thank you very, very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, welcome back. Session 1 was about scoping out the landscape and really thinking about what diversity in the modern world is and what it means and what it should look like. Session 2 is all about the curriculum. What can we do that is more meaningful in our schools to raise awareness, but to educate the young people who will be the leaders of tomorrow? We have got a brilliant lineup of speakers. I'm not going to build them up to put too much pressure on them, but 4 fantastic leaders who are working in different contexts to really do this meaningful, intentional work when it comes comes to the curriculum. We're going to hear from Benny Carver, a deputy head in a secondary school, Mark Pritchard, a head teacher in a grammar school, and I think recently an executive head teacher of a primary school too. We have Kate Smith, who is a co-head teacher in a primary school, and Serda Ferret, who is a co-CEO of Lufta, a fantastic digital platform. Just in that lineup themselves, modelling what a diverse panel looks like. So I'm going to hand over to Benny first of all, who is going to talk you through what it means to diversify a secondary curriculum. Over to you, Benny.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's quite hard to take 5 minutes to talk about overhauling a whole secondary curriculum. So I really want to focus on pragmatic and realistic approaches to curriculum reform. And what's underpinning all of this is the desire to usualize diversity within our schools so that you don't get people who forget that Arabic numerals are actual numbers and think of it as some sort of kind of foreign concept. So that actually one of the things that is highlighted is the connectedness of our society to the rest of the world and to the history of the rest of the world. And I use the term usualize thanks to Sue Sanders, who's been very much at the forefront of LGBT education. And she talks about the term in terms of making sure that sexuality and different sexualities are usualized and not normalized, because normalizing has those connotations of, you know, something that is the gold standard. And as far as possible, I want to talk today about avoiding victim narratives. And I think sometimes in schools, whether we like it or not, the representation of other cultures, of diverse cultures, is through the lens of victimization. So we look at famine in Africa, we look at the Holocaust, but we don't necessarily celebrate the positive contributions and the towering achievements of some civilizations outside of white Western Europe. For the simple fact is that we don't know enough about it. So first of all, I want to talk really practically about subjects that are lend themselves really well to the utilizing of diversity. So as an English teacher, I always start with English. And one of the great things that I've been able to work on with people is that the idea of first stories. So we often start with, you know, Beowulf or Chaucer, or actually we're looking at kind of fairy tale narratives that go outside of white Western Europe and outside of a kind of Greek and Latin basis, to be able to show students that storytelling is a universal concept, and that civilizations pre-white Western Europe have this amazing contribution to make. And I think the concept of first stories applies to history, it applies to science, it applies to art and technology as well. When you think about early feats of engineering, when you think about cave art, when you think about Aboriginal art, you really have that sense of first story. So my challenge is, where is the space in your curriculum to be able to include the concept of first story for your subject? So where do we get that space? And one of the criticisms, or I suppose one of the blocking points that people often come up with, is that we don't have space in our curriculum to do that. I'm not advocating a wholesale ripping up of the curriculum to add in, you know, stories that, you know, you're unfamiliar with. I'm talking about looking at the content that you have and making positive connections. So where in your units of work have you the ability to say, well, actually, there's something running parallel to this or before this that makes this particular bit of content particularly important globally, not just nationally, not just locally, and talk about how those other cultures have influenced British society and literature. If you're doing World War I, well, then talk about the positive contribution of minority ethnic soldiers, for example. And the idea of connection is something that's very, very close to my heart in terms of language, in terms of culture. I don't think our students see other cultures as connected to them. So I think that quite often when you've got quite monocultural classrooms, it feels like talking about diversity is a bolt-on. And really what we need to shift that message so that we're talking about diversity as a contributor to the British story. And not just in terms of, you know, we were in the war, but actually our language, our art, all is influenced by global culture. And this comes on to my second area. So not just talking about that pragmatic and realistic approach, it's really talking about teacher CPD. So SLTs out there, I challenge you to give your teams, your teachers, space to have a look at their curriculum and get them to work out what's missing and where they can make those connections. The biggest gift you can give to your teachers is time. So dedicate your inset days to that subject-specific knowledge that falls outside of a white Western culture. And the starting point is always reading texts that talk about anti-racism and highlight what systemic oppression is. So on a personal front, a teacher can take responsibility for their own education and say, I'm going to read about this. And then when I have the discussions about curriculum, I can make a positive contribution to that. And certainly it's not an easy process. It's not a short process. It is very much a process that takes time. And it takes people making the commitment to learning outside of their comfort zone. And I love the idea that teachers could be sitting in their team meetings talking about, well, we're studying Beowulf, but what can we add into this unit that's going to create kind of cultural connections? Yes, we're studying migration. Well, what stories do we have to tell to be able to usualize the idea of migration across the globe? And that would be my advice. And certainly I'm looking forward to supporting people to do that.
Brilliant, thank you, Benny. And what I'm seeing in the comments is lots of people checking themselves on the word you modelled there, usualise rather than normalise. Can I have asked you to speak to that word choice for a second, because there's lots of questions on Twitter.
Am I muted? We can hear me. Okay, right, fantastic. So the term is very much about making sure that it's not just a bolt-on, like diversity isn't just a bolt-on to your curriculum, that it's actually a fundamental part of what we teach, so that it becomes part of the daily diet of student experience and knowledge, so that you don't learn about other cultures through the lens of kind of exceptionalism. You learn it through daily interactions with, Black or Asian people. But I'm not just talking here about race either. I think in terms of disability and sexuality, certainly there's space for our curriculum to look at that as well, to usualize those experiences so that people aren't afraid of what's different.
Brilliant, thank you for qualifying that statement, because I think it's a word choice level. It's really, really important. I shared a brilliant piece this morning from a geographer who'd done a whole piece around first stories in geography, but she did do a warning to say, please don't just print these out and stick them on the wall. That's not meaningful diversity in geography. It's about how you embed it in the curriculum plan. So thank you for kicking us off there, Benny. Really, really thought-provoking. I'm now going to hand over to Mark, who's going to think about his context and how to take it up to the older students. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Mark Pritchard. Hello, everyone. I'm head teacher of Upton Court Grammar School in Slough. And I actually want to talk about the actual steps that the previous panel talked about, and Benny's just talked about growing that next generation who are well-rounded, kind human beings. And I think that the keys are personal development and service to others. When I began as head, I was chatting to the head girl at the time, and who was BAME, and she told me that she'd never been to the theatre, and I was just dumbfounded at that fact. She was academically successful, she was intelligent, she was actually aspiring to be a doctor, and she'd spent 7 years in secondary education without having been to see live theatre. So now I lead, as I said, I lead a grammar school, and it might not be what you imagine as a grammar school. 90% of our students are BAME, 90% are Asian. We're in the highest EAL quintile. The vast majority are from first and second generation immigrants to the country. Yes, they're aspirational. Yes, they're great at maths, but they also are kids from West London, from Hounslow, Hayes, Heathrow and Harlington. In many of our students' eyes, education is doing well in exams. Education is getting good grades, and it's also what education means to their families too. So I'm talking about diversity in the curriculum, not just about the academic content like Benny's just talked about, but giving students access and exposure to diverse experiences, real experiences that bring about personal growth and prepare them to be active and engaged citizens in our diverse society. So I think it starts with prioritising as a school leader. We need to put it front and centre in our school's mission. And we said that. We said, yes, academic aspirations are important, but also personal development is as important. It's a leadership mantra. So anybody who visits our school, we talk to them about it. Any parent that's interested in coming, we say that, yes, you'll learn the academic content, but you'll also have to do so much more. Alongside the core academic curriculum, we've developed another strand to our curriculum, and we started with that starting point. So what should children experience? Should everyone see live theatre, for example? And we built it from there. So we called it our Ad Astra curriculum. Ad Astra is the school motto. It's been the school motto for over 100 years. So we took that to the stars, and it means that excelling in maths will only take you so far. And I wanted to have I was asked to talk with a bit of a post-16 angle. And I know that every leader of post-16, every head of sixth form knows that for university or for quality destinations, grades are not enough. Employers tell us this. In fact, we all know this. I mean, I'm sure that you don't remember the grade you got in biology, or even particularly the lesson on cell division that you did, but you will remember the things that you experienced, like the trip to France or being part of the school musical. And so educators know it, and we know that personal development's the holy grail, but it's often sacrificed at the altar of the academic. And so we also know that you can't start personal development in year 12 and hope that you're ready by UCAS deadline. And you cannot develop resilience and leadership by reading an article or attending an assembly. You have to learn resilience and leadership by writing the article and by delivering the assembly. So what did we do? Practical things. So we built a curriculum to try and reflect those values, starting not in sixth form, but in year 7 and going all the way through key stage 4 and 5. The first thing that we did was try to broaden horizons. So built into the timetable is enrichment. So alongside maths and science and French, they'll also study music, but they'll do music for fun. They'll do yoga, they'll work on the school newspaper, they'll go to craft club, they do Duke of Edinburgh, they do Zumba, all alongside their GCSEs, and it's we consider it not as an add-on or a nice to have, but what education is at our school. Secondly, and actually most importantly, student agency and reflecting on personal development is built into our curriculum. So every student has to complete their own personal development activities. They choose what they do, from volunteering to setting up and running a club to leading assemblies or hosting a school event. But then crucially, they have to reflect on the learning that they have gained through doing that activity. And that's the essential bit. So from being a subject ambassador or going to the theatre, it's recorded and tracked just like their maths homework. And by year 13, at the end of their time in school, students should have a bank of experiences that not only have they lived, but also that they've got a record of their reflections and the learning that they had at each stage. And the third thing, in addition, we don't just have a school council, but we have a school parliament with students who are given leadership and agency over the areas that affect them directly. So we have a department for education, a department for culture and sport, a department for education, and we give them choice, voice, and agency to affect what happens in our school. Leadership and development is your 4th A level in our sixth form. So what's the result of all of that? I think proactive students who own the curriculum, who own their learning and their growth. And, you know, we don't have students who are cajoled to go to extracurricular activities after school, like in some places, and in some places I've worked. In my school, lots of students set up the club themselves and run it themselves. Students writing gets published. They plan cross-curricular fundraising events for local, regional and national charities that they are passionate about. And students who actually hosted the Diversity Ed conference in January of this year. It was in our school and lots of you were there. So as leaders in our school, just to finish, I think leaders in our school, we need to prioritize diversity of experiences to develop young people, to develop their self-esteem, their emotional intelligence, their self-confidence, but rooted in real experiences that grow not just knowledge, but also agency, values, leadership, and understanding. And I think this is how we will equip the next generation to disrupt the power imbalances that exist in our society and to really claim the world and the opportunities that should be theirs.
Mark, so powerful. Choice, voice, agency. Three words we want to see in every generation. But I think that being future focused, we can put plasters on all the problems in society right now, but we want to do things differently in schools to get a different outcome. And it's all about the young people we are shaping to be the leaders of the future. Thank you so much. That piece about student agency really, really resonated with me. Global citizens. I'm now going to hand over to Kate, who is a primary school head teacher in a very white part of the country, and thinking about like what can we do as white allies in white communities with white staff to talk about diversity, make it core curriculum as well. Over to you, Kate.
Hi, thanks, Hannah. So I'll be outlining the work that we've done in our school to create what we would call the ethical curriculum, and why that is particularly important for the context and the community that we serve, but also the importance of all schools creating curriculums that are diverse and ethical and relevant, given the social, mental health and environmental challenges that we are all facing. So a brief bit of context for you. I'm new to headship. I was appointed in July last year, so I have survived 1 year now. I'm a co-head teacher as well, in a beautiful part of Oxfordshire, very small primary school, just 106 children, and 4 fabulous teachers. We were in quite an interesting position when we started the school, in that it had been through quite a period of upheaval. So there was no real curriculum, no real values, no real vision for the school. And therefore we were in quite a unique position, which felt a little bit like starting from scratch. Which coincidentally is what I did the year before when I was a co-deputy head teacher working in Oria's school in Didcot, alongside Hannah, where she was the executive head teacher. So my current school now, and Oria's, just couldn't be more different. My school is 97% white, middle class children. And just what was really apparent when I started was this complete lack of diversity, lack of diverse representation in the school, within the staff, within the community, in terms of race, in terms of religion, in terms of ethnicity. And it just felt very, very sheltered. Now, I have got a wonderful all-female staff, very powerful, very ethically minded, but we are all white. And therefore I see it as my responsibility to create and deliver a curriculum that is diverse, that has a mindset that is diverse, where we're aware of our white privilege, and that encourages the children to explore their own identities, but in a wider world. And one of the questions that I pose to myself and my team, and I would pose to you as an audience, is how do you develop empathy and agency in your children when they have limited or no experience of diversity and the wider world? And when there's a lack of diversity in your school, it is far more challenging to use real, lived, authentic experiences that the children can learn from. In ethically and socially diverse schools, you can draw on the children, you can draw on the community, you can learn from them. But you can ask them those questions about Ramadan, about race issues, about what it's like to have gay parents. And in the school that I work in, the children would use the term gay as an insult to each other. They thought the word lesbian was a naughty word. The first time I did an assembly on the value of love, I had an email from a parent afterwards asking, if it's true that I mentioned lesbians in front of the children. And she wanted me to let her know in future so that could be discussed in a safe environment at home. But that's a valid comment. But I remember vividly that the feedback that I gave to her, the response I gave to her, was that we educate the children in school that things about things that might not be part of your world, but they are part of my world, and they are part of the world that your children will be growing up in. So part of our vision for the school is that we are making a conscious effort to get in more LGBT plus representation, more BAME representation, yes, through stories, yes, through books, yes, through visitors, But also actually this year, we've worked with the wonderful Anthony from Standing Ovation, so that the children have got real life BAME role models. And I'm very mindful that I don't want this to be tokenistic. I'm very conscious that teaching an assembly on Black History Month is not enough. Adding a few LGBT plus books to my library is not enough. You know, just celebrating pride in early is not enough. The things need to be embedded in the lessons, you know, in the attitudes of the governors, in the hearts of the staff and the children. And the wonderful Alison Creel reminded me earlier in the week, this needs to be their usual diet. It needs to be the usual tapestry of the children's education, because this is the usual tapestry of life. So practically, what we've done in our school is identified 5 key themes that sort of interweave through the whole curriculum and permeate every subject area. And these themes are ethical citizenship, managing relationships, attitudes and skills for life, the inner curriculum, and self-expression. So, referring to my earlier question about developing empathy and agency in children with a lack of experience, our curriculum plans and teaching have evolved around topics which help address the themes of injustice, climate change, challenging stereotypes, inequality, just to name a few. And an example of this is one of our earliest topics is entitled Fairy Tales versus Modern Life. So that gives the children an opportunity to challenge some, you know, quite delusive messages. I don't want any 4-year-olds growing up thinking that they need to be rescued by a white man on a horse. You know, stereotypes start young. We know that, you know, pink and blue, long hair, short hair, girls' toys, boys' toys. And the sooner we educate them, the more likely they are to be able to grow up and be, you know, strong in their thoughts and, you know, open-minded and more reflective. And the same goes for educating children about environmental issues, you know, and supporting mental health. These lessons should not just happen in PSHCE. They've got to be part of the school diet. You know, those 5 strands that we've developed, you know, they've been planned purposefully into the curriculum. And I think what's come to the forefront over the last fortnight's events is that actually it's not just enough to celebrate diversity. We've got to teach anti-racism. So my takeaways for you then, you've got to start with what you've already got and develop it. You've got to be creative. You've got to nurture your team. You've got to develop a team that are really passionate about teaching these issues. You know, they are the talent on the ground floor. They're the ones that are weaving the magic with the children. And no amount of beautiful planning will help if you haven't got staff that are passionate about ethical issues. Secondly, you've got to educate yourself on your white privilege. You've got to check your bias. You've got to educate yourself on women's issues, on environmental issues. Don't rely on others to do that for you. And thirdly, ensure that your ethical themes are not just tokenistic. Question yourselves on how you can weave those into the wider curriculum. Thank you. Just to leave you with a quote then. No one is born hating another person because of the colour of their skin, their background, or their religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. And that is our job.
Kate, brilliant, thank you. And I hope you don't mind me sharing. I know you were nervous as a white straight woman talking about diversity in the curriculum, but you've modelled to everyone listening. We've got a hater putting comments on how come we've got a diversity event? 4 out of 5 of us are white. I just want to speak to that. In the Equalities Act, there are 9 protected characteristics. I think between the 5 of us, we represent 6 of them. So yes, it's important to have racial diversity in representation. We have got racial diversity all day. We've also got cultural diversity, religious diversity, sexuality diversity, and gender diversity. So challenge, but please go in with the Equalities Act, do some homework. There are 9 protected characteristics, and if we had a class, there'd actually be 10. Lecture over. I'm now going to hand over to Serda, who's our final speaker, who's going to talk about digital storytelling and how to bring the world into your school when perhaps you haven't got that exposure to diversity. Thank you, Serda.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm actually going to start with a personal story, and I love the word usualize. Thank you, Benny, In the past, we have said that with Lifter, we're trying to normalize diversity. But more recently, we've been saying that we're trying to humanize diversity and diverse narratives. And humanizing diverse narratives is what I'm going to start with. And this is a story about my dad. My mum and dad are both teachers. They're retired now, but they were teachers my whole life. And they've raised 3 sons who are all working in education. My dad has a moustache, and he's had one not his whole life. He's had one my whole life. I've only ever known my dad with a moustache. And I've seen photos of him from the early 70s where he's clean shaven and quite handsome. And I know that he grew his moustache in 1974. And 1974 was a significant year for Cyprus. There is a point to this story, by the way. 1974 is a significant year for Cyprus, which is where my dad's from. There was armed conflict, which led to the division of the island. And on the 20th of July 1974, my dad was captured by Greek Cypriot soldiers and taken to a prisoner of war camp, where he was held for over 3 months. And as I was thinking about this, I guess that was his last lockdown experience. And this was obviously a deeply unsettling experience, and the scars remain with him today. And that's when he grew his moustache, and he hasn't shaved it off since. A few years after that experience, he moved to England, to London, where I was born and raised. And initially we lived in East London. And back then we were one of very few immigrant families that I was aware of. And then in the 90s, we moved to North London, to an area that was home to lots of Turkish and Greek Cypriot families. And for the first time, we were going to be exposed to Greek Cypriots. And we'd only ever heard stories about Greek Cypriots. But my dad basically sat us down, and he's a very warm and empathetic man. And he basically said, "You're going to make friends with Greek Cypriot kids. Like, I want you to go to school. I want you to find Greek Cypriot children. I want you to befriend them." And being Cypriot, he didn't just stop at befriending them. He was like, "You have to invite them to our house for dinner," because that's obviously what you do when you're friends with people. And he basically said, I want you to, understand that they are human. And I want your Greek Cypriot friends to see that you're human. And I think that the only way we can do this is by nipping it in the bud and actively trying to make friends. So based on this advice, my brothers and I all made friends with lots of Greek Cypriot kids. And to this day, one of my very best friends, Nikki, is Greek Cypriot. She's one of the godmothers of my children. She's one of the only people I've seen outside my immediate family over the lockdown period. And I genuinely believe that this was a seed to what has become Lifter today. The idea that we can actually, if we give ourselves the chance to meet and humanize people who we don't know that much about, we can find this common ground. So I should probably explain what Lifter is. And Lifter basically it invites children into the lives of people from around the world. You literally have a window into the life of a human being, into their home or to their workplace. It's digital, so you can go into their world. You can explore it in 360 degrees. You can click on various things to understand that context a bit better. And very importantly, you can always click on at least one human being in that space. And when you click on the human being, they come to life, and it becomes a short documentary film, a personal short documentary film about a slice of that person's life, where we touch on a number of different themes and topics. And our idea is that, the more people we meet, the more diversity we see through lived experiences, the more usualized diversity will become. And that is essentially what we're doing with Lifter. We work with schools, we work with primary, secondary and special schools. We provide CPD, which has traditionally been funded and free. I hope that will continue to be the case going forward. So at the moment, if you're a state-funded school, you can access this for free. yeah, we help teachers to try and bring powerful and immersive storytelling into the classroom in order to utilise diversity. That's me. Is that too short, Hannah? Shall I carry on?
No, so that's absolutely amazing. Lots of people ask you to give a bit more details about the company, where to find you on Twitter, website, etc. Can you speak to that for a second, please?
ta.com and on Twitter. Sorry? Am I muted?
You were on mute, so if you could just start again. You were on mute, so they didn't hear what you were saying.
You can tell I work for a technology company, can't you? So it's Lifta is Lyfta. It's the Nordic word for lifting, to lift. Lyfta.com. On Twitter, we are Lifta Ed, so Lyftaed. And I'm Serdar Ferret. I'm not going to spell that for you, but you can maybe see it under my name. And yeah, please reach out, ask any questions. We'll be very happy to help you. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, all of you. Honestly, the comments are amazing. Such powerful perspectives on the diversity needed in the curriculum and the ethics as well needed in the curriculum. And just from personal experience, when I worked with Benny at one school and Kate at another school, we brought Lifta in. We were in a very white part of the country. Our staff were diverse, but our community was not. And we did a conscientious decision about our curriculum to really give them a lens on the world. I didn't want our young people to just know what it was like to be in Oxfordshire. We wanted them to have an identity and belonging around the country, around Europe, around the world, and really sort of like have that wider perspective on life. So I've got some questions to field at each of you now. I'm going to basically just say your name, ask your question, unmute yourself before you start talking, please. So Benny, there's lots of questions coming up about labels, and I'm taking us back to our very first Diverse Ed event. We did the keynote about please don't tuck my labels in. Can you speak to the labels, but in particular, I know BAME as a label jars a lot of people. Would you mind speaking about the labels that we should and should be using, please, about race?
It's a really tricky one because I imagine, like with anything, it's really hard to get the world to agree on a particular name for something. When you're talking about 7 billion people, you know, trying to pin down an accurate acronym that talks about a group of them is going to be hard. And I think, again, to take a really pragmatic approach to this, BAME isn't perfect, and it certainly isn't, you know, the end point of what we call ourselves. But it is what we have now, and it's the most recognizable acronym that we have now. And these things can't be forced. You can't suddenly decide to call, you know, Black, Asian, minority ethnic people something completely different. It takes time and a movement to do that, and it takes, you know, the research and literature to do that. So I think it's a little churlish, to be honest, to be criticizing the label when there are things that are probably far more important to be criticizing. The treatment of BAME people, in fact, you know, whatever word we use, let's focus on the real issues rather than the label itself. There are lots of suggestions as to what it should be, but like I said, you know, it takes a concerted group effort of millions of people to change a label. And I'm looking forward to that happening, but it can't be a discussion for now.
Thanks, Benny. And it's something I've consciously made myself change the language I use in the last few weeks. I've done a lot of reading and a lot of listening about inclusive allyship. And I know BAME as an acronym jars a lot of people. But when I say women of colour, brown men, it also jars people because people think we shouldn't be using the colour of our skin to define someone. I think the advice I get from Jazz and Parfar is ask the person you're talking to and talking about how they like to self-define. And then we can have a conversation about the language we're happy using in our schools. So thank you for answering that question, Benny, brilliantly. I'm going to go over to Mark next. Mark, there's a real question coming up about this idea of disruptive leadership and how we can be disruptive as adults, but also as young people to challenge the system. Could you just speak a little bit more about kind of like what disruptive leadership looks like, please?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about our leadership in our school and actually in our trust, we try to we try to use a bit of a model to help people to see through their actions. So one of the things that we know develops leaders who can work in complex and ambiguous circumstances is those real heat experiences, and then being able to reflect on them and make sense of them. And it sort of is exactly the same thing for the students that I was talking about, giving them real experiences that they then have time and space to make meaning from. And I think leadership needs that too. We need to see what are the issues, what are the challenges, and then come up with creative solutions that we can take on and hopefully make a big difference. But it does require, I think, senior leadership teams to be really, really brave and say, this is what is important. This is we trust us. We know what we're doing. Trust us. We know that this is important. And I always try to avoid things like either or, because that I set up that that disparity between sort of maths and personal development. But personal development makes your maths better, and we need to make sure that it's both and they're not add-ons, and it's part of it. But equally, I do think that there are opportunities to give people that disruption comes from also colliding perspectives, and really getting those colliding perspectives. You need to meet people who aren't like you. So lift is one way of doing it, and you can see that. But we need to get students both out of schools, and we need to get other people into schools. We need to make sure that we're having the challenging conversations. Just now, even, we've put enrichment and personal development at the heart of our curriculum, but already in the last week, I've had parents saying to me, well, are you going to get rid of that stuff so we can catch up from the coronavirus lockdown and be able to just focus on math, science and English? And disruptive leadership needs to be brave and say, what is important, what is education about, and also what is really needed at this time in this particular struggle. And is it knowing how to do a quadratic equation, or is it knowing how to, really be emotionally intelligent and respectful to others who might be, struggling as well? So leaders need to be brave, and there's always going to be criticism from all sides, but knowing your values, sticking to your guns, keeping it simple and saying this is what we stand for, and we're not no matter what the changing circumstances, no matter what whatever the world throws at us, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's something else, and it'll be something else soon. Our values remain the same.
Thanks. So much to think about there, and so much resonates with me about being values-led leaders, but being courageous values-led leaders. We need to lead with our hearts. We need to lead with our values, and it's not always easy. I think what's coming up is there's a kind of a fear or an anxiety about putting our heads above the parapet, and what happens when we meet resistance from our communities. What happens when we get that critique? And I'm just going to ask Kate and Benny to speak to that, because I think we've all been through it. So Kate, what are your thoughts about doing the work that you believe in, that you're committed to, but navigating the resistance perhaps from your staff body or from your parent body whilst you're doing that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, currently, I don't experience any resistance from the staff, and I think that's really key. But because the school had been on such a journey before we started, we had to build a lot of trust with the parents, and that takes a really long time. Plus, we've got heads in the school, which is that's not the norm. So, trust is the bottom issue. And when I gave that example about the parent emailing in after the assembly about love, that is a really valuable point, because they haven't been used to leaders in the school that are prepared to address these issues that in my community may be perceived as being quite taboo. But we've got to, can't ignore that. That it was a valuable point. And actually I had one email from one parent, as I explained earlier, and then I had another email from another parent that said, Mrs. Smith, I am really pleased that you shared that assembly. The child in my school has got a gay uncle. and he won't talk about it, and he hasn't told anyone before, so then I could have a conversation with that child individually to say, my brother's gay, should we talk about that? Should we talk about what it means? Tell me about your uncle. That's really important. And I think, some of these issues are sensitive, but it's our responsibility, and with the new RSE coming in September, that's really important. And I think consultation with parents at all times is key, because that builds that trust, and then you can be transparent about what you're trying to achieve. When people understand why you're doing it and why it's important, then they can get on the bus with you.
Thank you, Kate. You're talking my language there. I'm going to ask Benny to add to that. So Benny, in our experience, have we experienced any resistance when it comes to diversity being at the heart of our school? And then a follow-up question for you. There's lots of questions around the sharing of personal narratives as staff. And you know that my favourite moment working with you was the big assembly. Would you mind just talking to those two for me, please?
Yeah, so the big assembly that Hannah is talking about is I affectionately call my big gay assembly, which was a decision I didn't make lightly. I've never stood up in front of the school and talked about my own experiences and my sexuality. And I think certainly when people look at me as an Asian woman, they make assumptions about my sexuality that, entirely embedded in the culture that we have. So when I did that assembly, I was petrified, knowing that our community that we were serving wasn't necessarily particularly supportive of diverse voices and diverse narratives. And one thing I realized very quickly is the children were absolutely fine. The children responded really, really well to that assembly. There were some lovely comments from students about how proud they were of me for talking about it so openly. And then I had that thought, well, they're going to go home and talk to their families about this, and what if tomorrow on the school gate I'm screamed at for teaching their children about homosexuality. And that didn't happen. I have to say, it didn't happen. In fact, what I did get was families who have parents who on the LGBT spectrum, and I had people thanking me for talking to their children about it. So the fears I had with that were unfounded, but I'm really conscious that that's not going to be the experience for everybody. So I would never stand up and say, come out to the whole school. It's a personal choice in the context that you have, but it can be really rewarding when you've got the support of your leadership team. And it takes a really courageous head teacher, executive head teacher, governing body who says, actually, we will support our staff and their experiences, and we will use their experiences to teach our children about the broadest world, the broadest scope of the world that they live in. That's no mean feat. And if you find yourself in a school that isn't doing that, then maybe ask some questions about why you're working there. Sometimes you can change people's minds and sometimes you can't. But the fear is one thing, but you've got to know you've got the support from your employers. Unfortunately, Hannah, I did. So it went really well.
Thank you, Benny. And that was my favourite adult assembly. My favourite child assembly was when our 6 young people in Year 7, our student council, delivered an assembly about equality and spoke to the year group and told them that actually the assembly was about equity, because equality isn't inclusive. 12-year-olds get it, guys. There's no excuse for us as adults if they can use that language. 2 more questions before we go to another coffee break. So, Serda, lots of questions coming up about CPD opportunities when it comes to diversity. Could you just talk about LUFTA opportunities, but also perhaps some of the British Council work you're aware of as well, please?
So LUFTA is one of the possible CPD options on the British Council and DFID's Connecting Classrooms Through Global Learning programme, which is a fantastic programme. So if you go to the CCGL website, you'll find a number of different opportunities for CPD, for funded CPD, and our course is one of those. And our course is called Teach Skills, Values and SDGs with LUFTA. And the SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a 2-part CPD where we do 2 hours as a webinar first, it's great. Lockdown has helped us a bit because people now know what a webinar is. There's no excuse not to know what a webinar is anymore. So the first part is a 2-hour webinar. And actually, I really love our webinars. I think Kate's done one recently, so I hope she can nod and agree that they're good. And then following the 2-hour webinar, we give participants, and it's teachers from 3 phases, so teachers from primary, secondary, and special. It's teachers, teaching assistants, senior leaders, exec heads, CEOs. We've had everyone participating. They get 4 weeks to try something with Lifter. And the minimum we expect is that they will at least plan a lesson or assembly. But ideally, they'll try it with children. And then after that, we have a review session where we talk about the impact that's been made. And that's always lovely and exciting because people come and share their impact stories with each other. And then at the to conclude it, teachers get a certificate from the British Council. So that is our CPD, and it's available for free if you'd like to take it at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. There's lots of questions coming up about, is this going to be available? Yes, we are recording this whole session and it will be on YouTube. If you want to do one thing as CPD, play your staff body this video. Start the conversation. You could do 4 twilights and have the four sections of landscape and culture and curriculum and leadership as part of your staff CPD twilight, particularly if we're in lockdown and it's remote CPD. And I'm very excited that this is going to be playing at the DFE. And actually, we're going to have policymakers listening to this as well. Final question goes to Mark. So Mark, you might not know the answer, but I'm sure you can think of an answer. Questions coming up about how we, as a system, as school leaders, can challenge exam boards and subject associations to bring diversity into their work. I know there's a lot of petitions going around at the moment about the black curriculum, but it's more than just that. Can you speak to kind of like the advisory bodies, please? So
I think the first thing is, and I know, there's an assumption there that some of the stuff isn't in the curriculum or isn't in the specifications, and I'm sure that is the case in lots of places. However, lots of things are subject leaders' choices. So in terms of things like texts and in terms of periods of history, there is some scope to choose, and also the angles at which you approach them and teach them. There is leadership scope. So I think, first of all, empowering our teams to make really empowered decisions. And I mean, for example, I know we haven't talked a lot about curriculum content. That wasn't going to be my focus, but I'm really proud of our history curriculum. I know that in year 8 they study the British Empire, they study it around the world and the impact it's had on people, including them, and students bring their personal stories to that. And so I know that there are aspects of curricula that where you can focus on things that we think are important. In terms of exam boards, I think there's a duty for all of us, therefore, to get our voices heard. There are always consultations about what should be considered. There's a current live consultation about GCSEs and A-levels for next academic year right now about what should be happening and examined in those. And as part of that consultation, yes, we're not going to say, teach a whole swathe of other stuff that we haven't included, but we can say and have our voices heard and say, in future, we need to make sure that there's breadth, that there's variety, and diversity is integrated and usualized, as we've talked about, in what students study and therefore value. And I take that point completely. If we want students to value it, sometimes it does have to be a qualification. It does have to be accredited. So that's why those things are really important. I do also think that we need to always put pressure on governments. We can all have active links. Most head teachers have an active link with their MP. So I know my MP, Tandesi, and we must be telling our MPs that these things should be on the curriculum, and we should be deciding it. Teaching bodies should be deciding, not central government, and not a top-down approach. And just sort of finally, I think there are ways, I think, that in terms of coronavirus and other things, that it has disrupted education. It has given us an in to start to reimagine what it might be. And I think this is the moment. I think it's the moment to bring those different perspectives together from the huge amount of press that is happening currently that we talked about in the last panel around the Black Lives Matter campaign, etc., as well as coronavirus making people value education. We now need to take the moment to say, actually, really, is the content correct? And can we make some brave decisions about what we teach and how we examine it?
So I'm just going to sum up with 2 words: visibility and voices. Who is visible in our schools? Please don't work in a school where your website is diverse, where your prospectus is diverse, but when you walk around the school, you only see white people on all the walls and straight people on all the walls. And then you have that token notice board for Black History Month. Please don't work in a school where when you sit in a science lesson, it's a white man after white man after white man on every slide. And not just the pictures we see, the thought leadership. Please don't work in a school where every single citation is from a white male theorist. We have all got eyes, we have all got ears, and we've all got mouths, and we need to use them. Thank you very much for tuning into our diversity session. 10-minute break, back at 11 to talk about school culture. Thank you, everyone. Okay, everyone, welcome back to our 3rd session, I think it is, of the morning of our 4th Diverse Ed event. We've got a brilliant lineup for you for this session about school culture. We've talked about the landscape. We've talked about the curriculum. It's now about how we can create cultures in our schools to embrace and celebrate diversity. And I'm joined by 4 speakers. We have Naomi Ward, a former school leader who is the founder of Purposeful Educators. We have Audrey Pantelis, who is a former head teacher who is doing work around diversity and smashing glass ceilings and concrete ceilings. We have Patrick Otley O'Connor, who is an executive head teacher who's going to talk about inclusive allyship. And we have Hannah Jepson, who is a specialist in all things diversity and a business psychologist, who's going to talk to you about the unconscious bias in the recruitment process. So first up is Naomi. Naomi, over to you.
Thank you, Hannah, and hello, everyone, friends, colleagues, and new friends. It's wonderful to be here. So we're here to talk about culture, and culture, for me, in its essence, is how we are with each other. And a culture is created by the quality of our interactions. So I work with a community called Purposeful Educators, and we have a belief that we take a stand for. And that belief is that we are all artists, poets, and geniuses. And the quality of our culture flows from that. The quality of our interactions flows from that. And I'm going to invite you to try that on for a moment. So just bring that belief into your awareness. Everyone on this call, everyone here now, everyone watching this in the future is an artist, a poet, and a genius. They have everything they need to create the life they want to create, everything they need to create the impact that they want to have, that might be a spark inside them, or it might be burning inside them. They have everything they need to bring that into reality. And I invite you to send that out to everyone here. And now to turn that energy back onto yourself, that you as well are that artist, that poet, that genius. It's powerful. It's generative if we believe that about each other within a culture. And how many of us have worked in cultures where that is a belief? So from this foundation, I want to talk about purpose. So purpose for me is 2 things. In one hand, it's your unique fingerprint of your gifts, your skills, your story, your strength, your values. And in the other hand, it's the impact that you are called to have, that you are born to have, that you know deep down is there. And so when you have that sense of purpose, you will take a stand for it because you will feel it, and you will speak up, and you will find your people, because you can't do anything alone. And if you can't find your people who are coming together around this purpose, then start a community. I mean, this is incredible about Diverse Ed and all the other communities that have come together. So how do you create your purpose? Well, Ben Okri has this wonderful quote, which is, stories are a reservoir of values. And I would say that's true for purpose as well. So your purpose is within you, within your stories. And I'll give you a quick example of that through an educator I work with called Danny. So she was coming back from parental leave, and she spoke about this kind of tangled cloud of anxiety that would follow her as she pushed her son around the park. And we talked about that, but we also talked about her stories. And she told me about her tutor group. A year 9 tutor group who made up for what they lacked in numbers with personality. You know the group I mean. And one day a boy came up to her, a boy with learning difficulties, and he said, Miss, I really want to sing to the class today. Is that okay? He'd missed the talent show. And she said, took a deep breath and said, yeah, of course you can. And so he went out to prepare to sing. And she turned to her class and they said, no, it's okay, miss. We know what you're going to say. We've got him. We'll take care of him. And he came in and he sang. And they celebrated him and they clapped and applauded him. And this was just what she did. And she didn't understand yet that this was kind of her zone of genius, that she was able to create a space where everyone belonged. And so from that and other stories, we created her purpose, which was, I am the champion who emboldens people to be mindful of themselves and others. And from that place, it's a movement into action. And she went into action. She created mindfulness assemblies, mindfulness spaces before exams. And only in awareness of our purpose and bringing it up to the light are we then able to take skillful action that really expresses our true self. And my dream for school cultures is that all of us are able to take a stand for our unique value and purpose and express it in order to have that impact that we were born to have. So my pledge, I guess, is to continue to take a stand for the people I work with and their unique value and purpose, and for you to do that, and for you to call that forth in the others that you work with. And let's create those cultures where we can bring that diversity of purpose to the fore.
Beautifully put, Naomi. You framed the session so well, and there's lots of really positive traction in the comments. And I think what we need to do as educators is think about the conditions for inclusion and belonging that we create in our classrooms. How can we create those conditions in our workplaces for our adult colleagues as well? I was quite shocked to hear from lots of women of colour this week who are head teachers where not a single adult in their staff body or governing body has asked whether they are okay. Hasn't asked if we're going to check in with them. I'm now going to hand over to Audrey then, who's going to talk about some of the systemic, societal and structural barriers that we need to collectively smash in order for people to progress.
Thank you, Hannah. Morning, everyone. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the systems and some of the things that I've seen from my own perspective as a Black woman, but then also just talk a little bit more about kind of possibly some kind of call to arms and some actual actions. So I will end with some kind of points that maybe might generate some questions for you to have a think about. So my name's Audrey Pantelis, and I've been in education now for nearly 30 years. If I say it quickly, then hopefully it doesn't seem too long. And I've been an unqualified teacher, I've been a teacher, I've been a head of department, I've been a head of faculty, I've been an assistant head teacher, and all of this was in the mainstream. And then I changed phase and went into special educational needs, and then I kind of went back and started again. So I was a class teacher, and I was a head of department, I was a head of education before then becoming a head of school. And I've recently left my permanent head of school role, and I'm currently undertaking interim roles at the moment, and also looking at different areas, including this particular area of diversity and smashing ceilings. So throughout my career, all the time, most of the time, I've suffered setbacks like most people have. And as I've got further up the ladder, as it were, what I have found is that, of course, the opportunities to kind of progress have slowly become more diminished, despite there being a lack of head teachers in the country, which is interesting, isn't it? And I very rarely, in my interview situation, when I would get to an interview, lucky enough to get to an interview, rarely see other Black candidates, very, very rarely. And despite the amount of initiatives that we have that have been put into place over time, we don't have that diversity in senior teams in schools, and we don't even have them in boardrooms across the country and indeed the world. So you've heard of the glass ceiling concept, and you'll know that, you know, that's defined as and I'm going to read the definition here: an unacknowledged barrier to advancement in a profession, especially affecting women and members of minorities. Now, I'm going to go so far as to say that actually, as a Black woman, actually we have concrete ceilings. So glass you can see through, but concrete, there's nothing to see. Literally, that's it. You can't permeate that. And so as a result of that, what we are starting to get an idea of is that cultural diversity. And if you like, I won't say we're tinkering at it, because in certain aspects and in certain particular organisations and in schools as well, we do get that appreciation of the differences in individuals. And we see that in the variety of ways. And we've heard that this morning as well. But what is not so well promoted these days is the opportunity to rise and to steer the culture itself. And it kind of echoes what Naomi was saying about we all have something to bring to the table. And that isn't necessarily the case. And we know that there are a growth of minority workplaces and workforces, which creates dynamic, multicultural and kind of vibrant kind of workplaces. And we're really big at that, aren't we, in schools for the kids? But we're not so big on that for the staff. And you may argue, okay, well, actually, it's a school, it's for children, and that's right. But actually, surely we should be celebrating everybody in there and not just making it a kind of a pupil and adult kind of separation. And what we'll get if we don't kind of challenge our stereotypes and if we don't challenge our prejudices, we're going to get a culture that just means that we just get the same, which is kind of what we're talking about already. The fact that, you know, our recruitment panels are male, pale and stale. And that's a shame, because of course we are all bringing such vibrancy, every single one of us, regardless of our colour, of what we can do. We're bringing in vibrancy. So some schools and some organisations think about diversity training and they think, yeah, that's great, you know, but how well do we actually understand it? Patently, we're not understanding it very well. I would go to say that we've got a situation where we have pockets of understanding. We have sometimes areas where it's okay, but when it gets to something a bit tricky, then we back away from it. And then we get some areas where there's nothing going on at all. I think it's been mentioned in the earlier discussions about visibility. And it is a key factor. It really is a key factor that needs to be used both positively and negatively. So generally speaking, we tend to get the use, especially from a Black woman's perspective, my own, that, you know, that we are seen. And we need to be seen in a positive light. But when we are seen in our workplaces, it can be one of two or three things. It can be that we're seen and that we're either a bit too much, a little bit too crazy, a little bit too loud, and we need to tone it down. Or we get sometimes conversely the other. We're a breath of fresh air. We're bringing in lots of energy. Isn't this great? Until something's not quite right. And then it's our fault. Or sometimes we have to unpick that and suddenly it comes down to us. And of course, what we're contending with, even though we've gone through that whole situation with the recruitment process, etc., jumping through a lot of hoops, we will still get that kind of microaggression, still get, and I've definitely felt it in my career, the aspects that actually were not quite enough. So what we're lacking at the moment, what I believe we're lacking, is comfortable, trusted strategic partnerships. We're missing those. We're missing the strategic feedback. That's what we're missing at the moment for that diversity. And we're also missing that real opportunity to showcase the breadth of skills and experience that we have. And if we're not going to increase that, if things don't change, then what we're sitting at and looking at really is more of the if you like, the discomfort that we're getting right now. And COVID is kind of bringing that all up. It's bubbling it all up. And we're not going to get any change at all. We're just going to get the same old, or we're just going to get lots of people feeling very aggrieved. Change is difficult. Change is uncomfortable, but it doesn't need to be aggressive. It doesn't need to be confrontational. It just means that we need to have those conversations, and they need to be, mutual conversations. And we need a clear plan. We need something that means that actually we've got an outcome. We know where we want to go with this. Here are the milestones to say we're getting that. But rather than taking the stick, actually just making them really tangible. So as well as those regular opportunities to make sure that we're we're working towards that, and a pledge, if you like, to ensure that that's the direction of travel. We already have it with regards to our networks. We've got those networks in place already. We've got them, they're there. But we need to kind of encourage them and actually feed from them and actually utilize them. It's not good having just a network and then it's just a network. It needs to feed into the system. And we need to showcase talents and ethnic achievements from all employees, including, Black and ethnic minority employees. And we need to celebrate it in a way that's not, oh my goodness, isn't this great that we've got 5 BME employees and they're doing really, really well. It just needs to be part of what we want, what we do. So my biggest takeaway as I finish is really just to think about the fact that we need and want and welcome a genuine level playing field. That's all we want. That's all anyone wants. Merit is the only currency that we should be utilizing to enable us to progress. That's the only one, just merit. If you can do it well, then you get what you get. If you don't do it well, you strive harder to become better. But it's really, really important to remember that if we're feeding this all through, if we're trying to smash those ceilings, if we're trying to ensure that actually things look different, we've got to make sure that people are seen. And for the majority of us who are Black and ethnic minority, or with any form of disability at all, or any form of difference, it's going to be very difficult to be what you cannot see.
Wow, Audrey. Wow, you're getting amazing comments. We see you and we hear you, and it is about us all working together. And I've had a sense of the last couple of weeks that people are finding their voice, but are they being heard? Are they being seen? And actually, there's a massive silence out there from the voices we need to hear from. And we've got voices here, like Patrick's now going to speak to the piece about being a white male ally and what he's doing in his schools, because we need everybody to be stepping up and speaking out and being part of the solution. So Patrick, over to you, please.
Good morning, everybody. As Anna says, I'm Patrick. I'm an executive principal in the Northwest at the moment, and speaking to you as a straight, white, non-disabled, old, male head teacher, one of the 93%, as Alison said this morning. And I suppose I'm going to give you my experience this morning of my experience as an ally and the things I've been doing and encouraging to do now. And I use my allyship to actively promote and advance that culture of inclusion and equality and equity through intentional, positive, continuous efforts to support and benefit women, BAME, disabled, LGBT in education. And as it's been said by many people, if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. So that's been my approach. And it's been actually a lifelong process in building that relationship and growing based on trust, really, and working with marginalised or underrepresented individuals or groups. And also an opportunity to grow and learn myself and about myself while building confidence in others. One thing my allyship is not, it's not self-defined. In fact, a recent podcast I did on being a BAME ally with We Are in Beta, before I even went into that conversation alongside Alana, I spoke to people within the BAMEd network to say, what is it you want me to say? How can I be useful as an ally to further this conversation? That's been important. It's not always been my experience. I was born in the sort of small pit village of South Yorkshire in exclusively white communities, and my early life that's how it was spent. Broadened a little bit at university, but it wasn't really until I got my first full-time job in Bradford when I went in as a PE teacher, as a strong man, as a white saviour, as it felt. And when I look back, and I think some very patronising attributes to my character back then, as I went through. And I don't really remember, although I felt uncomfortable with many of the things I was seeing and hearing from colleagues. I'm talking colleagues here, not just with the students. The first time I publicly remember calling out racism and sexism and homophobia was when I was just appointed as an assistant head at 27 years old, just short of 28. And that lost colleagues or friends in the staff room. And that was fine, and that felt comfortable. That was my first open active allyship, and that really grew as I became a deputy with whole schools and activities, but it really didn't become, I think, in my view, a true ally until at 38, just before my 39th birthday, I got my first headship, where I could sort of develop my own values-based vision for equality and diversity within schools. And then I've since then taken it on to Twitter and beyond and grown exponentially in terms of my own understanding. So it's a journey I've been on and continue to be on as I go forward. In terms of responsibility, people have been talking about the action you take, but really it's responsibility to everybody, and particularly around those people who don't identify as allies at the moment, who maybe through some of their behaviours are starting to do so, who I'm wanting to really influence the most to encourage this growth of allyship as we go forwards. As an ally, I try to match the words I say here with my words, and I think actions, words without actions can actually be detrimental to the work and changing culture that we're wanting to see. I make a continual investment in supporting others and trying to support others, people that reach out or where I see an injustice that I want to help to address, and I hold myself accountable for that, encourage others to challenge me when I make mistakes. I also apologise and prepared to sort of rework my approach towards allyship when it needs to change, and that's occurred as well. And I think it's important to model that vulnerability as an ally as well. That's not easy, and actually being an ally at some point, it's not easy because sometimes people want to vent or their frustration comes out in the comments that you make. And I think I've had to learn and become increasingly comfortable feeling uncomfortable in that debate, and I think that's where I continue to grow. I think to be a true ally, it's not about, you hear people say it's not about me, but it really isn't and shouldn't be about me and my own protected characteristics and the white privilege in particular, or as a man. It's about lifting others through my own advocating of their work, sharing growth opportunities maybe, recognising systemic inequalities and doing something about them, or being part of doing something about them, and actually believing the underrepresented people's experiences. We mentioned this morning, Alana talked about how frustrated and furious she is when people call out you using the race card, and actually actively not doing that and listening and believing people's experience and people's stories, and I suppose most importantly listening and supporting and reflecting on what we do. I've become a sponsor for many people that reach out as well, actively championing and supporting and aiding their career and their career development through coaching, particularly at the time of application and recruitment for new posts. And I suppose the biggest thing I've done and where I felt the most uncomfortable and personally under attack is calling out inappropriate behaviour. I could give you several examples where using my privilege to call out those people who are saying or doing unacceptable things where underrepresented people may not feel as comfortable. There was a recent example on BBC Question Time was filmed from my school, and it was the episode where Lauren Fox was denying the existence of white privilege, and in the green room I had we locked horns, and that continued onto Twitter, and I was vilified and actually threatened for the challenge I offered there. I've withdrawn from an interview previously because of racism that I heard from the chair of governors during that process, and I've called out in board meetings, even a point when someone was saying we need to grow a pair of balls as an organisation. I told them to woman up instead. There's a bigger story behind that at some other point maybe. But I try to use my influence to get involved and to help change things. I think Hannah's going to touch later on, I think, on CPD and recruitment, but actually it's not just good enough to do tokenistic approaches to unconscious bias training. It's regular. It should be part of what we do and part of, actually, as we've said within the curriculum, it's not Black History Month, it's not just Black Recruiter Teacher Month, if ever such a thing existed. It should be how we do what we do all the time and our processes in our schools. I think For any leader in school, one of the 97%, I think it's really short-sighted not to tap into that massive underrepresented talent pool. There are so many people in groups that are underrepresented that aren't there at the moment. We have a shortage of teachers, we have a shortage of leaders, so why shouldn't we be engaging? That's maybe not the moralistic approach, but what we should be doing for education to increase the growth of leaders and teachers within schools. I reach out regularly to hear other voices, to challenge and cross-examine my own view and keep learning and keep supporting those around me. And I think my pledges today, having heard what I've heard and to continue what I'm saying here, I think my pledges as an Ally Day today is to continue feeling uncomfortable and having those conversations, and then to encourage other people to feel uncomfortable too and engage, and not to engage because it's too uncomfortable. I want to work to understand more of those systematic societal issues that actually played a role in my lucky career. As I see, it's not to do with luck, but my privilege got me there and looking to change some of those, and actually continue to be an ally to champion, amplify the voices and successes of those underrepresented individuals and groups.
Thank you, Patrick, for modelling how to be a reflective and self-aware straight white man, and how to put yourself into a situation where we don't always know, but you ask the questions and you sit and you listen and you learn. And we need more people to come and sit in this space and listen and learn. So thank you so much for putting yourself out there as someone who's prepared to stand alongside people and do this work. And I think you've segued lovely here to Hannah to think about some of the processes. So Hannah, I know you can't do unconscious bias justice in 5 minutes, but please can you talk us through some practical ideas about how we can diversify recruitment? Over to you.
Thank you so much. So yeah, as Daniel mentioned, I'm Hannah. I'm the co-founder, director of LGBT Ed. I'm a very, very out, proud gay woman. I think that's important to say. I'm the lead coach, obviously, for Leeds Beckett LGBTQ Inclusion Award in schools. And I also run my own business, and we specialise in leadership and talent, assessment, selection, diversity, and inclusion. And yeah, want to talk to you today about recruitment and bias. So I want to ask you a question, which is, how do you go about choosing someone to be on your team? And when I say the word team, I mean your partner, your friends, your sports team of volunteers that you've selected for a specific project, or your team at work. Because in making those choices, what we think we're doing is picking the best person for the job. And some of the time we might be, but when we think about what best looks like, it looks like us, because that's what makes us feel safe. We're programmed to recognize more quickly the people who look like us, to value more the opinions of people who are like us and who have more shared experiences, and to listen more closely to the people who sound like us, to choose the people on our team who are the best by our standards. I was delivering a session, one of my sessions around unconscious bias in Lewisham last year. And at the break, I was looking out of the window and I could see a group of school children about to play a game of football. The male teacher made 2 boys captain. This was a visibly diverse class, but both captains happened to be tall, they happened to be skinny, they happened to be white boys. They could have been picked purely on merit, but maybe not. The to-in and fro-in of picking went on until the last person to be picked was the short, chubby, black girl, and she went by default to the last picker. I've thought about that scene a lot since then, and about how these ideals of what good looks like and what best is are drilled into us at such a young age, and it can be so damaging. We need only to look at the makeup of leaders around the world to see that the structures that have existed unchanged for years are those in which similar to me bias wins out in selection. And so I want you to think about how you go about choosing people to be on your team, and whether at work you're creating the systems and processes which enable true inclusion to play out, and whether you're reviewing, critiquing and changing processes when you realise that what's happening is that you're attracting, sifting, choosing people who are all the same. We've seen the devastating ways in which conscious bias, prejudice, stereotyping plays out in the world, and we're reminded that despite our progress, there's so much further to go. But let's look to unconscious bias now, which is deep. It's ingrained, it's in all of us, it's hard to notice in ourselves and even harder to stamp out completely. And when we're thinking about choosing people to be on our team, we know that unconscious bias sinks deeper and deeper down because we cannot be seen to be allowing anything but a fair, transparent, objective, consistent process to be rolled out by way of selecting people. Our unconscious biases, as we know, can be expressed through microaggressions, which are those small, subtle signals that we communicate through our behaviours. Researcher Albert Moravian found that only 7% of what we communicate to people consists of what we actually say. That the use of our voice, such as tone, intonation, volume, takes up 38%, and that more than half of what we communicate to others consists of our body language. So if that's the case, we can be sure that our biases are showing up even in the way we sit across the table from our candidate, or the way that we welcome them into the interview room before we've even asked the first question. So how do we get around this? Well, sometimes, and often you'll have heard this, we talk about fit. And don't get me wrong, fit is important. It's important that you assess whether someone shares your values and is driven by your mission to give the young people in your care the best education possible, regardless of who they are or where they come from. But fit can cover up a whole manner of biases. And fitting in means complying, means being like the rest of the team. Homophily is a theory, it's been around since the 1950s, roughly means birds of a feather flock together, choosing people who are like you to spend time with, to associate with, and to be in your team. We know this happens in all walks of life, and it's part of the reason why we're here today, because in education we are not diverse enough, particularly at leadership level. In his book Rebel Ideas, Matthew Syed talks about homophily, talks about homogenous groups, and he talks about collective blindness. He used an example of the CIA, who up until very recently had incredibly archaic recruitment practices, and are still now not as diverse as they need to be when you consider the vastness and complexity of the problems they need to solve. He talks about 9/11 and that there was no way that this complex and dangerous threat could have been seen for what it was, with a team of white, English-speaking, Protestant, middle-aged, middle-class men. Some of the subtleties in the symbolism we saw the world over on our screens were missed, the seriousness of the message not considered. The selected analysts were individually perceptive but collectively blind. How can we expect to solve some of the most complex problems if we don't choose people to be on our team who have a diverse set of perspectives and experiences on the case? Diverse teams perform better. It is as simple as that. Now, back to my last girl standing in Lewisham. I'm an avid football fan, and I nipped out on the break just to catch the second half. And do you know what? That girl scored. Whilst everyone else was running as fast as they could to compete with each other, she had placed herself strategically on the edge of the D, and she scored. She used her strengths in a way that were different, in a way that looked different to everybody else, and she scored. She thought differently about how to play in that team. She did not comply, but she did win. So I want you to think about this today. How many times have you thought, this person challenges my assumptions, they're different, they're going to disrupt the norm here, and this person deserves the job? And how many times have you appointed someone just because they fit? What is it about them? And what was it about the person who didn't quite fit that was the wrong choice? Because maybe they would have scored. Finally, from me, here's the most boring call to action you'll probably get today. Are you checking your recruitment processes are objective and fair? Are you casting the net wide or going to the same places you've always gone to find new talent? Are you being transparent about your processes? Because to Alana's point this morning, they don't need to be a secret. Are you using frameworks that allow you to objectively score a candidate's performance, using a common language on which you all agree as a school instead of being led by your gut? Are you aware of your biases and how they show up for you? Have you considered the wording in your job adverts and how they might exclude certain groups of people? Because sometimes that's what leadership and allyship is. It's not glamorous, it's about a quiet grind of making systems and processes fair. We've seen what happens when the quiet grind runs the other way. So as leaders and as allies, review that advert, tweak that policy, redesign that interview, because sometimes that is the biggest lever you can pull. Thank you, Hannah. We seem to have lost Hannah, but I'm sure she'll come back.
Sorry, I removed myself from the stream. There we go, I'm back. I was so blown away, Hannah, like full to arms. Far from being boring, very practical. And it's about what we can all do collectively. I'm trying to keep track of the questions because Audrey and Hannah, you've been helping me with the questions all day, and now I'm by myself. So I'm trying to read the comments and do the questions. So question one, Audrey, some of the audience are commenting that they feel like they're getting contradictory advice about whether or not we should ask people of colour how they are. So can you speak to how it feels when people don't ask you, and then perhaps give them a frame for how they should ask you, please?
Great question. It's a really good question, and I do you know what, I share the anguish in it, and I've gone through a bit of a cycle myself over these last couple of weeks. Okay, let's talk about if you don't know what to say. I suppose sometimes there are right words, sometimes there are wrong words. I think, first of all, what I would like to have heard, what I would like to hear, is just an acknowledgement that actually this must be quite tricky at the moment. And it might, just be vulnerable and just say, I don't really know what to say, but I'm aware that there is something to say and I don't know what that is yet. Just saying that in itself just means there's an acknowledgement. And that acknowledgement is great. I think one of the things that possibly right now at the moment that probably a lot of Black people are very sensitive to is the rightly meant, but that whole idea of all lives matter, kind of backing that up. That grates a bit. It's not to say it doesn't. I'm not saying all lives don't matter, they do. But right now, we're talking about Black lives. And right now, we're unpicking that. Right now, Black people are hurting. Right now, Black people are thinking, where do I go to express some of the pain and some of the hurt and some of that deep down pain that we've squashed down for years, not talked about, thought it's just part of the system. So actually, saying all lives matters to counteract with that will rankle, and then you'll start to get aggression because people are cross and they're angry. So I would say acknowledge that you don't know what to say. Then it's a case of then going and doing a bit of homework. But what the one thing you probably I would advise to steer away from is coming to a Black person and say, give me answers. We haven't got answers, and even if we had the answers, we would have put them in place by now and things would be different. We haven't got answers. We want basically some solutions, but it has to start with the systems, and we live in a predominantly white country, so I'm afraid we can't do anything. So that's really what we're looking for. Some acknowledgement, yes. Don't make us recount it all over again. What happened to you? No, and I'm reading that on Twitter and feeling that pain. We don't want to revisit it, but actually what we do want is for you to go away, do some work, and then come back and let's then have a conversation about it. And some of the things that Hannah said already with regards to recruitment, I think for me, having been through those processes so many times, I think are absolutely crucial, absolutely crucial.
Thank you, Audrey, and you're getting lots of thanks for just addressing that, because it's a bit like we talked about with the labels. Which labels should and shouldn't we use? Should we be asking, are you okay? Should we not be asking? I just want to segue to you, Naomi. In your coaching sort of like spaces you created, I think, can we just speak to how in schools can we create a space for voices to be raised, but also to be heard, and for people to feel safe? And I'm not just talking about Black lives here, I'm talking about anyone in a school. How can we create safe spaces?
I think it has to come from beliefs, from principles, from values. You have to have that shared framework and to create that foundation so that when people don't feel that they are being heard, they are able to call out, and they have permission to call out, and they are expected to call out that person who is not fulfilling those agreements. So it needs to be absolutely explicit that this is what we stand for in our school community. And it shouldn't just be on the individual to call out the fact that they feel invisible. It needs to be on everyone to notice that. And if they don't notice it, for that person to stand up and say, this is how I feel, and for them to be heard and acknowledged, and that to be acted on, and go back, keep going back. What are our beliefs, our principles, our values? That is our North Star. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Naomi. And I think just what I said earlier on about how we look at our students compared to how we look at our staff, we consider ourselves to be emotionally intelligent leaders. We like to think we all have empathy in us. We can see in a classroom or a playground which child is distressed. We just need to use that same lens on the adults around us as well. We can see it. We just need to choose to see it and choose to do something about it. We would not leave a child in a playground crying. We would not leave a child in a classroom feeling unsupported. And that's how our staff are feeling in some of our schools right now. Hannah, can I ask you a question? What's coming up is the tension between individuals who want to show their authentic self in a workplace, but they feel like there's a tension between their authentic self and their professional self. Is that something you could just kind of explore, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult one. I think so. It kind of reminds me of an interview when we launched LGBT Ed. I was interviewed on BBC Radio London by Vanessa Feltz, who asked me. I don't come in and I wouldn't go in and tell my young children that I was hungover. So why do you need to tell them that you are a lesbian? And I talked about kind of what is morally dubious and what is, part of the fabric of life. So this question around authenticity, I think that as a school, as a culture, you have to define what that means and looks like and sounds like and feels like for you. In terms of LGBT, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not about wearing a rainbow cape every single day and you being the only one who leads the big gay assemblies. It's not about that. But it is about finding as a team what authenticity means and feels like for you, and agreeing on that and then living it. I hear that there's a tension, particularly with some of those hidden things, that there's a tension between kind of what you your professional self and your authentic self. But what I would say is think about when you were growing up, what you needed. And that's the work that we do at LGBT Ed, is needing and looking for the role models that we needed at school. So it isn't about kind of sharing everything about your personal life, but it is about being authentic in who you are and agreeing as a school culture what that authenticity looks like, sounds like, and feels like.
Thank you, Hannah. Great advice there. Patrick, can we just revisit? What's the advice to straight, white, able-bodied males about embracing vulnerability and embracing feeling uncomfortable? How do they start that journey to be an inclusive ally?
Okay, just to start with, to pick Anna's point, there's not one governor, teacher or student at my school that doesn't know I'm married to Mel and I've got 5 sons. So I'm open about my relationships. Why shouldn't anybody else? So just to pick up on that point there, I think it's wrong that that's not the case. I think the first thing to do, diving into this if you've not done it before and you've not done that, is very difficult. I think for anybody who's not been openly an ally before, it's difficult. I think engaging, first of all, in a conversation just around any of these topics that we've discussed today is a good starting point, and then to increase them to do so. But the one thing to do is just to be, I'm going to use Women Ed here, be 10% braver. Just to jump in and have a go and actually start becoming more comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And it's fine. And it's actually around listening, not actually offering solutions. And I think as leaders, quite often you put in the seat and you've got to have all the answers. And I think it's okay not to have the answers and to be able to seek the answers from other people and to widen that group and to increasingly, if I have got to say, for example, if I am a leader in a school that's exclusively white, or exclusive leadership terms, or exclusively male, or not for none of the groups that we've talked about today, then I think it's upon all of us to embrace that and actually challenge ourselves to make sure we are inclusive. So a starting point is engage and listen and ask people. So if you're asked how are you responding to Black Lives Matters within schools, don't just assume as a white male or white female or whatever that you know the answers. Ask and seek and do those. And that's exactly what we've been doing in school. So don't be afraid to ask and listen and learn from other people.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm just going to read out a comment from Angie Brown. As a Black woman, she feels uncomfortable for her life. We feel uncomfortable listening to things we don't want to hear and having conversations about things we don't feel informed on. There is a continuum of uncomfortability. And there's a difference there between people fearing for their lives and people fearing about judgment from something that comes out of their mouths. Angie, that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I want to come back to you, Audrey. So some of the questions coming up are probably from people who didn't come to the event on Wednesday night. And they just want some advice on how to be seen and heard in a school where they feel like their voice is just going into an echo chamber.
Oh, thank you. All right. Yes, it's a tricky one, isn't it? If I had the answer, then I suppose I'd be very rich and feel very content. I suppose I'm now just going to draw back on my own experiences, really. I think ultimately, if you are not, and you are doing everything that you can in such a way to enable that visibility, to enable that strength that you possess to become part of the culture, and if you're having those conversations, one-to-one conversations, collective conversations, and it's not moving on, you might have to question. And I'm not saying that you just up and leave quickly, but you can't flog a dead horse. I think one of the things I've learned over my life, and especially these last 5-6 years, is that if you get to a certain point where actually your values and the way you are and your authenticity and yourself, your true self, you bring it, you present it, and it's not listened to, then I literally live the title of this particular conference today, be celebrated, not tolerated. If you're not going to be tolerated, then move on, because there will be somewhere where you can be. I think that the quality of your conversations needs to be in order to, and that's the thing that we've always had to contend with as black people, especially black women, that if you're too much, then you're shouting, and every time you shout or you're trying to make your point made, you're aggressive. So if you're doing all of this in an irrational way and you're still not being heard, then maybe this isn't the community for you. Maybe this isn't the culture for you. But I think it's just about being consistent. I think Alison talked on Wednesday about keeping a paper trail, about putting things in writing and making sure that there is a very clear narrative about what you are trying to do. I think that's all I can suggest from my own humble perspective. I couldn't tell you anything more than that. But what I have done, happily to say this on record, when it hasn't worked for me, I walk away.
Thank you, Audrey. And I've sent everyone the link, and I'll share it again to watch the recording from Wednesday night. So there's some great advice there from women to women about how to raise your voice and use your voice and listen to voices in a school context. Our final question, I'm going to go back to Hannah. So it's a two-pronged question here, Hannah, about talent management. How can we talent spot better in our organisations, in the staffing we have? And how can we diversify our talent pool applying for jobs? Over to you.
Okay, how long have we got? Not long. I think it's a complex question, and it depends on your context. What I would say is about searching for talent is often I have conversations, and to be honest, often it's with governors who say, well, we need someone from a legal background, as if that's a reason why they don't have a diverse set of governors. And I'll say to them, this particular point was around the point of having BAME representation, and I said, we're in London. Do you really believe that there are no BAME legal professionals that exist who you could have on your governing body? So one of the things that I would say, and it's not super practical, but one of the things to say is look harder. Connect with grassroots organisations to help you for free share your job adverts. These are things that people can do to support you find new talent. If you've been looking it's that phrase of if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. Look harder. These people exist, they're out there. So don't tell me that you've tried hard and that you're just not getting people through. In terms of talent spotting, I think that's a question of looking at your data, being mindful of what is the current makeup of your school, tracking that tracking progression in a really meaningful way, and using that data of progression, entry, and exit to inform what's happening, and try and kind of get both some quantitative and some qualitative data about why people aren't moving up in your school. And part of all of these things is about reflecting on your own practices, reflecting on, as Naomi said, what is the culture you want to be. In terms of talent spotting, yes, it's okay. It's a really good idea to have a kind of a talent program that lifts up certain groups of people, but only if the system is working alongside that as well. So there's no point having, which is why, you know, LGBT Ed, we're working with individuals to make sure that they feel authentic when they go for those leadership positions, but we also are working with the system so that the system doesn't then kick them out as they're going really enthusiastically into these interview processes as their authentic selves. So it's a two-pronged approach. Work with the individual, but do what you can to change the systems, whether that's the system within your school or more broadly, to change the processes.
Thank you, Hannah. And I was just writing down as you were saying that. It's all well and good leaning into diversity in our recruitment. When we then recruit diverse staff, we need to change our school culture to enable them to flourish and be empowered. I think I've heard lots of stories where schools have led with, we are welcome to diverse applicants, but they're not doing the work in the schools to actually make those diverse people feel inclusive in the school system. So I'm just going to wrap up some of the messages that I've heard from this session. So thank you for all four inputs. Ultimately, do something, not nothing. Say something, not nothing. We need to challenge, we need to disrupt, and we need to dismantle. And I'm going to repeat that. We need to challenge, disrupt, and dismantle. It's a collective responsibility. It's a shared vision. This isn't on one person. And if we're doing it collectively in an organisation, it probably feels a little bit less scary, because it's not one voice challenging what's wrong. It's a group of voices. So thank you so much to my four brilliant speakers. It's a 10-minute break now until session 4 starts at 12 o'clock, and we look more closely at the leadership we need to see. Thank you very much. Try again. Hi everyone, welcome back. Session 4 of our morning, and we're now going to think about what it means to be inclusive, diverse leaders in our schools, in our education system. We've got 4 brilliant speakers from very diverse backgrounds to share their journeys with you. So we have Adrian McLean, who's a former head teacher and a system leader in the Midlands, who's going to be talking about visible role models. We have Amy Ferguson, who's soon to be a deputy head teacher in an AP school, who's going to be exploring intersectional leadership. Everyone needs to know the word intersectional and what that means. Then we have Dennis Sims, also a former head teacher of an AP school, who's going to talk, and he's now an educational consultant and coach, and he is going to be talking to you about disruptive leadership. And disruption has come up a lot this morning. What does it mean to be a disruptive leader? And finally, we have Kieran, a former teacher who is the CEO of The Difference, a programme that is affecting the system and changing the face of our leaders. Really excited to have you all here, guys. Same format. I'm going to call each of you in to share your 5 minutes of thinking, and then we'll go to Q&A. So over to you first, please, Adrian.
Good afternoon, everybody, and just thank you for everybody for tuning in, and thank you for me being here and for you to hear my story. This afternoon, I'm going to be talking about visible role models and the importance of that. And I could talk about this for probably 2 hours, but I haven't got 2 hours. So I will probably follow this up with a blog of some description afterwards. But I'm going to explore 2 key themes with you in the short time that I have. The first one is about being the visible role model that you needed as a student. And the second one will be around being the role model that you need or needed from colleagues. So briefly about my experience, I was in education for 18 years as a student. And not once did I encounter somebody who looked like me. I didn't have a teacher that looked like me. I never had a brown or a black face that looked like me. And that kind of, on one hand, made things really difficult because, as I'll talk about, and as has been talked about this morning, if you can't see something, it's very difficult to achieve it. So that, on one hand, that was something there. But that's not to say that I didn't have some brilliant role models, because I did. My deputy head and head teacher at my primary school, they were phenomenal, and they struck this love of learning into me at an early age. When I got to secondary school, I had an amazing teacher, a form tutor, who he's the guy that I aspire to be, and the teacher that I inspire others to be, because he was phenomenal. He was the people's champ. He made you feel like you mattered above anybody else. Didn't matter where you came from, what your background was, he made you feel that way. But I mention that because representation is something that is very, very much a high topic at the moment. And representation for me has 2 distinct bows to the string. And the first one is about, as I've touched on already, if you can't see something, it's very difficult to aspire to be it. I didn't have that as I was growing up, and as I've came up through education. As has been mentioned this morning again, 97% of head teachers, what has been my aspiration, and to go back to being a head teacher is an aspiration for me. 97% of head teachers are white males. So that means that 3% for in terms of males are of ethnic diverse backgrounds. I know that 0.6% of Black Caribbean become head teachers, and for me, as a mixed white Black Caribbean person, it's been a case of that they represent 0.1%. So those latest figures, I was part of that 0.1%. I'm no longer part of it. So that shows you something within itself. So to go back to being a student, being the visible role model that you needed as a student, what am I talking about? I'm talking about being that person who is an advocate and an ally for those young people. Being that visible role model, showing them that there is more to life than what's going on. When I grew up, the only Black people that I saw on TV or names up in lights were sports stars, movie stars, rap stars. That was it. That's all the big role models I had to aspire to. I didn't really see anybody in positions of high authority that looked like me. And 26 years later, after I've left school, it's still pretty much the case. That's why we're having this discussion today. So representation from that point of view is really, really key and really important. But the flip side of it, I can say that as I work as a trust leader working across 7 schools in a 98% white area, it's really important for breaking down those barriers as well. And as Benny said earlier this morning, for utilizing what you look like in that domain. Because I've broken down so many barriers this year working in that environment, working with predominantly white children who thought it was okay and the usual thing to do, you're right, sir, safe, and come up and want to give you affirms. No, that's not how we behave. That's not normal. That's not how we expect to be greeted. But that's what they've seen on TV. That's what they expect all Black people to be like, and that's not the case. So I've broken down a number of barriers there from that point of view. I've worked really quite closely with students from a Roma Gypsy background this year, and we've made an incredible bond because they've realised, as well as I've realised, that we share so many similar stories and traits and experiences that have happened. So we've broken down barriers there. And that is massive because that's changed their level of understanding of the world. That's allowed them to see things in a different light. It's changed the chemistry in their brain and how they talk and how they think about things as they move forwards. Going on to talking about colleagues. How can you be that visible role model and share that with your colleagues? Well, for me, there was nobody in senior leadership who looked like me. All right, okay, and that was something really difficult. I'm a bull in a china shop for that kind of thing. I'm going out. If I want something, I'm going to get it. But not everybody's that way inclined. So it's about visually representing that for them, showing them that representation, that you can do it, you can see it. And once they see it, they start to grow that confidence to know that they can do it. So there's 5 things that I really try to do, and I implore you all to do. And it doesn't matter what background you come from, in terms of diversity. You take out my angle of being a Black male and you insert your diverse angle, it's exactly the same process. So first and foremost, I make sure that I find out about their background and their aspirations. What do they want to achieve in this profession? What is the pinnacle of what they want to do? And I push them about that because it's not just enough to turn up for me. I then use that information and I share it with my senior colleagues and I make sure that it's widely known. I'll come back to that in a minute because it's important for something I'm going to say later on. I publicly praise them. I make sure that they feel the love that they get from that, because they need to make sure that they understand they're good at what they do and that they can do this, because we've been programmed predominantly to think that, oh, no, people like me or people who look like me, we don't get to do that. That's not what we're here for. So no, I'm challenging that assumption straight away. I speak their name when they're not around. So I'm always talking about the quality things that they've done, because not everybody's like me. Not everyone shouts on the rooftops and says, this is what I'm doing, take notice. So I make sure I speak their name about what they're doing. I invite them to meetings that are the next level up above where they're currently at. So if they're a teacher, come along to the heads of department meetings, see what it's all about. If they're a middle leader, come along to senior team meetings. So you get rid of some of that mystique that you're superhumans and you could do something that I couldn't possibly do. They get to recognize that we're all humans too, and they get to see what's behind the curtain. And then pivotal to going back to where I started about sharing with other colleagues around the table, you have constantly needs of challenges and programs and things that need to be led within school. This then comes back to, once you've done all of those things, making sure that you can recommend and push those people forwards to being able to undertake those challenges that come up, those little projects where you don't have capacity to do them. They can go on and take them to show them that they're better than they think that they are, and that they're more fulfilled in doing that, and giving them that drive and desire to show that they're able to step up to that level, and B, also showing the community of the school and at a wider level, whole school and outside of the organisation, that those people can do that. So I'm a real big advocate of doing that. It doesn't matter to me whether, yes, you know, I've got a big bee in my bonnet at the moment about black males in particular, because we're a real small number in schools. There's less than 4,000 of us across all schools. Okay, that's not okay. That's not good enough. Okay, and that needs to change. But I'm a big advocate across everything. It doesn't matter to me. If you're somebody with a disability, you need to share that with students. If you're somebody who comes from a diverse background, you need to share that with students, because you're going to break down those backgrounds. If you are a member of the LGBT community, you need to share that, because those students are there, they have those thoughts and they don't think they've got anybody that they can speak to or anybody who understands what they're going through. You make such a difference by doing that and being their advocate. I can't speak highly enough about it, but I know I'm aware that the time is up. So I'm going to finish on one last thing to make sure that I'm pushing that as well. I've become a governor last year, so I'm also a governor, to make sure that I'm representing those communities from a governance point of view. So I look forward to the questions. I look forward to talking to you more at another point, and I will put out more thoughts about this in a blog later on this afternoon. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Adrian. So powerful. It's really resonating with the audience, this concept of demystifying leadership and pulling back that curtain. And it's not a secret chamber where all the white men go and just make the decisions. We need to be modelling and sharing and breaking down. I know as a head teacher, I didn't know about finance or HR until I became a head teacher. We need to be building it in, and that's succession planning is absolutely key. So thank you so much. It really, really resonated. So Amy, pick up the thread, please, and talk to us about what it means to have intersectional leadership.
No, you can't. Hello? Yes. Oh, brilliant. Hello. Thank you, Hannah. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm a mixed race woman who is part of the LGBT community. So I live intersectionality every day of my life. I don't get to put down one part of my identity and pick up another when I feel like it. I'm able to hide, let's say, my sexuality, but not my race. It's likely that assumptions have already been made about me because I'm a feminine woman before I've even begun to tell people about my life. When I took my first steps into leadership, I was anxious about how I would be perceived in meetings if I was perhaps too passionate or too loud or too much, and I'm trying to put my point across. Would my colleagues perceive me as an angry black woman and switch off and not hear the point that I'm trying to make? I found myself in a bit of a predicament. Stereotype threat stopped me from being my best self and was holding me back from being an assertive leader. But how can I be inspiring as a leader if I'm holding myself back? So I decided that I wanted to lead in a way that models bringing your whole authentic self to work. And by showing the courage to do this, I would inspire my colleagues and the young people in our school to show up, to speak out and be themselves. I had to be proud, stand up tall and be heard, not only for myself, but for everybody around me. So the issue was bigger than me. And so when I consider how my intersectionality has informed my leadership style, I think about how I can offer perspectives from my experience, but how important it is to have diverse teams leading our organisations. Now, I realise that I could be seen as an anomaly, as a mixed race lesbian woman in education. So as we have discussed previously, the stats, don't look good. The 2018 Teacher Workforce Survey suggests that 0.4% of teaching staff are mixed race, white, Black, Caribbean, like me, and there are about 100 white, Black, Caribbean school leaders, deputies, assistants and heads. However, I'm not an anomaly in the rest of the world. Schools don't exist in a bubble from the rest of society, and there needs to be role models that reflect the rich diversity of our society. And we know that people perform better when they can be themselves. So everybody benefits, staff and the young people in our schools. To succeed in leadership and to build teams, we must be willing to bring our whole selves to the work that we do. And this means showing up authentically, leading with humility, and remembering that we're all vulnerable and imperfect individuals doing the best that we can every single day. It's about having the courage to take risks, speak up, ask for help, connect with others in a genuine way through allowing ourselves to be seen. That goes back to, have the courage to talk about what your family looks like at home, have the courage to diversify what you're teaching. It's important that students see that and see themselves reflected back. But historically, there have been many groups of people who haven't felt the freedom, let alone had the choice to share more of themselves at work because of legislation such as Section 28. And we are still dealing with a lot of hangover from Section 28, I think, and prevailing attitudes about race, about gender, about sexuality. It's not always easy to show up authentically, especially at work, and it can be for different reasons, because of your individual background and intersectionality, or because of your role in the organisation. You might fear there's going to be repercussions from your colleagues if we don't fall into line. We're conditioned to separate our home lives, our personal and our professional lives, so why would we expose ourselves unnecessarily? What's the point? Why don't you just fall into line? Of course, there's going to be a risk there, and it might feel like an even greater risk to do this at work because this is your livelihood. It's how you make your money. There might also be a fear of being rejected or criticised or judged, or even, people taking the mickey, being ridiculed, putting yourself out there. Some of us are naturally more extroverted, some of us are more introverted, and there are people who will choose not to talk about their feelings or lives because they don't want to, and that is also okay. Being willing to bring your whole self to the workplace is more about getting to a place where you have the freedom to be authentic and vulnerable, and also the freedom to choose what you want to reveal about yourself. It's not just about the choice to talk about personal things or feeling safe to do so. It's about those little corridor interactions that people have. It's about the day-to-day management of the organisations. Now, in schools where staff are reluctant to share their ideas and thoughts, not just on a personal level, but on whole school issues, the school's missing out on opportunities to improve and grow by not listening, but not having that space for people to share and feeling safe to contribute. Leading with authenticity allows you to impact the culture of your school. It's to unlock greater creativity, develop connections and relationships, and improve performance. If we're not doing that, it means that we're not even close to getting the most out of our working relationships or our jobs. I want to leave you with a question. Thinking about what you've heard from me today, what one thing could you do to bring a little bit more of yourself to work? and ask yourselves, how do you want people to experience the conversations that they have with you? And you can connect with me on Twitter. I've got my little Twitter handle here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for stepping into the breach, because I only asked you to join us yesterday when somebody didn't feel safe to come and join us today. So thank you so much for stepping up and being prepared to lean in. And I know your following is growing because everyone loved what you said on Wednesday night, and equally it's going off on your Twitter feed right now as well. So thank you for being such a visible role model. I'm now going to move over to Dennis then to talk about what does it mean, Dennis, to be a disruptive leader?
Thank you very much. So yeah, as Hannah said in the introduction, can you hear me? Yeah, great. So yeah, as Hannah said in the introduction, yeah, I'm a freelance consultant and coach. I specialise in leadership and behaviour in schools. And prior to that, I was head of school and alternative provision in Nottingham. I'm mixed race, so my dad's from Jamaica, my mum's from right here in Nottingham, and yeah, hearing those stats that you mentioned earlier, yeah, I was writing them down, going, yeah, that I was also part of one of those percentages, but now working outside of schools, you know, I've come outside of that as well. I also co-chair Teach First Head Teachers Network, which is a group of head teachers, around about 85 head teachers across the country. So I have a really good insight into, you know, the challenges and the opportunities that are within the education system at the moment. So in terms of thinking about disruptive leadership, I think that can mean so many different things to so many different people. And even the word disruptive is often negative when we're speaking about, you know, pupils' behaviour in class, for example. So I wanted to focus on 3 areas of disruption and being a disruptive leader. So firstly, disrupting ourselves, starting with our thinking and our own actions. Secondly, disrupting your sphere. So that might be the classroom that you teach in, it might be your workplace, it could be your family, or maybe a community group that you're part of, or your neighbourhood. And then thirdly, disrupting your system. When I started teaching, I definitely skipped straight to number 3. And I had all of these fantastic ambitions of going into education and changing the world. And I remember writing this postcard here, and it was kind of like, have a think about what is your mission and what's your purpose in education. And I still keep it here. But on reflection, I definitely wasn't ready to change the world. And I actually had a lot of areas of development personally and professionally before I can even influence, you know, one person, never mind, you know, a whole school or a whole education sector. And I think it's really important to focus on ourselves. And the theme that's been running through this morning is around continually learning, continually reflecting. And I think one thing that I want to call out over the last few weeks really is just this desire that so many people have to criticize and condemn others. We see it in society, we see it on social media particularly. Oh, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And there's often a place for doing that, but we often use that as a deflection tactic that stops us from really reflecting on our own actions and our own ways of thinking. And, you know, being from an ethnic minority myself, you know, I don't want to assume that I am, you know, without unconscious bias. We all have to do that reflection and thinking process. So a couple of questions to help us with this is asking ourselves, what don't I know? So when you're facing a decision or you're in a conversation, rather than just using our knowledge as a security blanket, thinking about what don't I know? What are we missing from this situation? What haven't I thought about or uncovered yet? And secondly, the question that every 4-year-old loves to ask is why? You know, and we can ask why until there are no more whys left. Why am I doing this? Why do I work here? Why do I get up in the morning? Why am I facing this situation? And I've faced it 4 times before, but I'm still back at the same place. Why? And then lastly, what needs to change? And I think, you know, thinking about, oh, I'd like to get to here. So what would need to change in order for that to happen? What would need to be true in order for those things to be the case? Are really useful questions to ask ourselves. So what don't I know? Why and what would need to change? So moving on to, we've thought about disrupting ourselves and our thinking. We'll then be able to start to disrupt those around us. And we can only be ourselves. You know, I advocate for being a a respectful collaborator and to be humble in what we can offer, but to also understand the value of what we can offer. Back to this postcard, I was so ambitious, but I was never going to achieve it on my own. I was never going to do what I wanted to do as a silo. It's important to do what we're doing here, which is engage in conversations, be part of networks and connect so that we can all have a greater and more positive influence. And thinking about systemic change or system level leadership, we need to have a voice and we need to be heard. And I think we don't need to wait for permission to do that. If we're a classroom teacher or if we're a leader in a school or if we're working in a different space, it's so easy now with technology to have a voice and to be heard. And one thing that I recently did was I published a guide to help schools to recover after coronavirus. And so many people have said, oh, who commissioned you for that piece of work? Nobody. I just decided to do it. And I think if you have an idea or if you have some thoughts, put it out there. It might help one person or benefit one teacher, one school somewhere. And it might even benefit people that you may never know about the impact. But I definitely encourage you to lead from where you are. I, again, going back to being ambitious, have definitely been guilty of saying, when I was a teacher, oh, if I was a middle leader, if I was in charge of this department, I know I'd do this differently. And lo and behold, I became a middle leader. And if I was sat around that SLT table, it would be different. Things would be different if I was an SLT. Get into SLT. But if I was the head, if I was in charge of this place, things would be different. And even as a head, speaking with so many head teachers all the time, but if I could influence educational policy, then would really have a difference. And actually, this kind of wistfulness about the future and positions and influence we might have, it's really important to come back to where are we now? What can we do from the place that we're in? How can we lead ourselves really well? And just to influence the sphere that's around us initially. And hopefully, as we do that, we can start to have a momentum of change going forward. So yeah, great. Have the ambition, push on and have those big dreams, and great things can happen. But it's so important that it starts with self. And hearing Patrick speak earlier on this morning around kind of that self-reflection that takes place and the learning that many of us have been going through and have been prompted to go through as a result of recent events, I think is so important, but often undervalued. So yeah, my parting comments for you all would be to challenge yourselves first before you challenge others, to think about what don't you know, to ask the question of why, and then really think ahead to what would need to change in order for that to be true. Thank you.
You're getting a round of applause from your peers here, Dennis. Brilliant. Why? One question we're going to keep asking. And I loved your modelling of being the change we want to see. If you think something needs doing and it's not being done, go and do it. Don't wait for someone else to step in that space and do it. The grassroots communities exist because the system did not create a diversity and equality strategy for the system. So we've created our own communities and we're challenging upwards rather than downwards. So a woman who does that a lot herself, someone who is challenging the system and bringing change. Kieran, talk us through your journey and what you're doing at The Difference as the CEO of a programme that is all about raising inclusive leadership in the system.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me? Thanks a lot, Hannah. And thanks so much for having me on this panel. I feel really humbled being with such a great group of people and a bit nervous about my role going last. So you've asked me to talk about my leadership journey a little bit and the programme that I run that is about developing inclusive leaders. I'm an English teacher originally, so I love a rule of three. And I thought Dennis did a lovely structure to his talk. So I was quickly thinking, right, what's my rule of three? Well, first, I'm going to talk a little bit about how The Difference and how I define inclusive leadership. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Difference Leaders programme itself and what our role is in creating diverse and inclusive leadership. And then I'm going to make out a call really to those listening and participating as part of the Diverse Educators network of how we can work together on the things that The Difference is working on. So number one, what is The Difference working on and what is inclusive leadership? Well, I said I'm an English teacher by training, but a little bit like Dennis, early in my career, I got positively frustrated with the why, and I went into policy to find out, particularly why our most vulnerable children weren't getting the best out of the education system. And that was kind of linked to my own experience. I grew up in Hackney, and I became a teacher over the border in Tower Hamlets. And when I was training to teach and teaching, my sisters were being taught at the same time. And my sisters are both adopted. They were when they were quite young. And I saw how they experienced school versus how some of the most privileged children in my school, which was still serving a very deprived community, experienced school. And it made me hyper aware of those most vulnerable children in our school system who've experienced disadvantage. And that question about how we make education work best for the children who need it most drove me into policy and drove me to set up the Difference. And the Difference focuses particularly on exclusion from school. And we use that as a lens for vulnerability. I think that's really important, because the children who get excluded are at the acute end, but actually the challenges that they face in their lives can be seen in all of the children that we work with. They have well-being needs, they have safeguarding needs, and they have learning needs. And when those aren't met and recognised, they can escalate towards school exclusion. But when we define inclusive leadership and exclusion, we're talking about being aware of all children and staff's learning, well-being, and safeguarding needs. And just to illustrate how that plays out for excluded students, those children at the moment are 4 times more likely to live in poverty. They're 7 times more likely to have a special need and 10 times more likely to have a recognised mental health problem already by the time they're excluded. And they're 20 times more likely to have had a social worker and interacted with the social care system. So we can see that this is a real kind of concentration of vulnerability. And then what tends to happen nationally is that those children, their education isn't visible to us as a sector, the pupil referral unit sector that serves those children who others have really struggled to work with. That part of our profession has been neglected. And at the moment, there's a recruitment challenge. So you're twice as likely to have an unqualified teacher if you are excluded and learning in a pupil referral unit or AP school. And you're also very unlikely to pass your passport, English and maths qualifications. Less than 5% pass their English and maths qualifications at 4. 50% are not even entered. So what we really need to do is make a focus on this part of the education system, because it has the possibility to change children's lives. But we know that long term, there's really negative outcomes if we don't do that. Many people listening will have heard of the exclusion to prison pipeline, and will know that 1 in 2 prisoners were excluded when they were at school. So the stakes are super high, and the Difference has been founded because we believe the best teachers need to work with the children that need them most. So on to my second point 2, how are we going to do this? What is inclusive leadership, particularly in terms of the Difference Leaders Programme? Well, I did what Hannah suggested we ought to do. I quit my job and I decided to try and fix the problem myself, although, as Dennis says, definitely not on my own, by collaborating with others. And through that, I've built a programme called the Difference Leaders Programme, and it's young. It's in its first year of delivery. We've got Difference leaders across London and the South this year, and we've just recruited Difference leaders in Yorkshire and the Northwest. But the Difference Leaders Programme is about raising the status and the expertise of this work, working with vulnerable children. It's a 2-year development programme for school leaders, and we attract our Difference leaders are often middle leaders or early career senior leaders, and we place them for 2 years in a senior leadership position in a pupil referral unit. And in that position, they're able to lead, they're able to bring their mainstream expertise, they're stretching themselves, and they're learning so much from their colleagues in pupil referral units about what is currently working with the most vulnerable children. And they're pioneering pedagogy, because actually we don't know yet what most works with those vulnerable children. And so it takes bold leaders willing to kind of think outside the box, try different things in their classrooms and in their schools. So our Difference leaders do that for 2 years. We support them. They get an MPQSL through the programme, fortnightly supervision with a psychologist, a dedicated leadership tutor who helps them make change. They get specialist training in supporting people's wellbeing, learning and safeguarding needs. And they're part of a value-aligned cohort. But at the end of the programme, we're trying to get those leaders back into mainstream schools. So it's a 2-year career development, but those teachers don't stay in Prue. They're going back to mainstream, and we are trying to develop the demand in mainstream to respect that career expertise. And I'm working with MAT leaders, CEOs and heads across the country who are saying, actually, we need that in our schools. We want someone to come and be deputy head and lead how we do things really differently. I've got 2 minutes. I'm just finding out. Great, that's good, because it's bringing me on to my third point, what is the relevance to diverse educators? Well, first, I think thinking about our students. So I've said that very vulnerable students are those likely to be excluded, and this is the time when that is more worrying, because we know domestic violence is rising, serious adult mental health is rising, bereavement is rising, particularly amongst families of colour, and also the experience of racism is a trauma itself, and it interacts with other traumas, and it's part of why Black Caribbean children are disproportionately excluded at 4 times the rate, that dual heritage Black Caribbean and white students are over excluded at 3 times the rate, and Gypsy, Roma and Irish traveller students, Adrian's already talked about, they are also disproportionately excluded. And I think if we want to be anti-racist, we need to upskill our staff teams to be trauma aware and bias aware. And Alison Creel spoke this morning about anti-racist values being laminated on the walls. That's empty. That's bullshit. To be frank, what we need to do is have continuous reflected practice, a constant reflective practice about how we're trauma informed and bias aware. And that's why The Difference provides staff supervision, which is regular and fortnightly. And we're trying to develop a community that constantly thinks differently about how we challenge the status quo in our classroom, in our staff teams. The second reason that The Difference overlaps with the diverse educators community is teachers. So we talked about diversity and leadership, and it's key. I say the best teachers need to work with the children who need them most. I do not mean I want to reinforce a white male leadership stereotype. 5% of senior leaders, assistant and deputy heads are people of colour nationally. 33% of our student population are children of colour. That disparity is disgusting, and it is reinforcing some of the inequalities that we see. I am really proud that for the 2nd year running now, The Difference is a sector-leading organisation in recruiting diverse senior leaders to posts. And I've worked really hard on our selection process, and I'm constantly learning, thinking about how it doesn't replicate bias. I spoke at BayMed about that last year, and I'm writing a blog about it to kind of share that more widely. But I'm really proud that 44% of our difference leaders on the programme this year are people of colour, and 30% of them are Black, which I think is important to say, because the BAME moniker can mask colorism in leadership, and we need to be clear about what we're talking about. And that 44% is compared to 17% of Teach First recruits into the profession. So I'm really proud that we're defining inclusive leadership and high status leadership, not within a white male paradigm. And I also want to shout out to Women Ed and to women. 70% of my difference leaders are women, and I'm really proud of that. Look, it's not perfect. There is continuous challenge. I'm very aware this year that Muslim teachers are underrepresented within our cohort. And I think that is particularly problematic as we move into the north of England, where I know that Islamophobia is a really significant part of racism. And I'm on the lookout now for fantastic leaders, the best teachers who want to work with the most vulnerable children. So my first call to the diverse educators community is, do you know an amazing difference leader potential? A teacher, a middle leader, senior leader who would be great on our programme. Tell them about the difference in our community. Please get them to look us up on The Difference Ed or on our website, www.the-difference.com. And the final question is for head teachers out there. So are you a head teacher committed to diversity in leadership? If you are, then I need you for 2 reasons. One is my difference leaders have spent a year in pupil referral units doing amazing things. They've got another to come, and then they're going back into mainstream schools. So if you're coming to today's conference thinking, I want to get diversity in my leadership, don't talk the talk, walk the walk. Contact me, find out about my difference leaders, and maybe they could be leading incredible inclusive practice, thinking about people's learning, well-being, safeguarding needs, embedding staff mental health, and challenging inequality in school. Or maybe the last shout out is you're a head teacher or retired head teacher, a coach who is really finding the mission I'm describing resonant. In that case, I want you to come towards me and volunteer to coach, spend time with, talk about your leadership career with my difference leaders, so that they can learn from your expertise and you can help them become the head teachers of tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. Always so passionate. I love listening to you, and you cram so much information and statistics into a very short speech. So well done. Some quick fire questions. Our recording's going to stop at 12:45, but we will carry on till 1 o'clock. But it'll be live. It won't be recorded. And I want to make sure the key messages get shared so people can share them. So first quick question to Adrian. Adrian, some of the governors who are with us today are feeling like there's undue critique, perhaps, of governance. Can you speak to what can governors do to help our diversity vision, but also why should everybody go and be a governor in a school as well?
So I think it was covered in the last session a little bit, in the respect of that people go out and they say, oh, we need a governor who can focus on this particular thing or this particular area. I think of it in the opposite way around. Actually, can we get people who are representative of our school community, who know and understand what our school community wants and needs? One of the things that the school I'm a governor at is they've got a hugely diverse population of people who are from many different backgrounds and who are learning as we go through. So there's lots of people that are paired up with a specialist in that particular area who are learning more and more about what is going on. I think the real thing is that gets lost in that, and I think people are fearful of, is that we want people who are passionate, who want to see the right things that are happening. So if you are a person from a diverse background, get yourself involved. That's the first thing. Don't be scared about looking behind the curtain to see what you think it is. This really is like the Wizard of Oz. You know, it's not the all-powerful being of the wizard. It's literally just some people. So let's get in there and let's make it happen, because your job is to hold the school leadership team and the head teacher accountable for what they're doing. That's your job. And if you don't like what's going on, go and do something about it. That's the way we're going to make change. So that's
I think I lost you, Adrian, so I'm just going to jump in there. Thank you so much. A really, really strong message there. My next question is going to Amy about the concept you introduced about stereotype threats. I want to share 2 stereotypes I've heard in schools, but also from people I know. Stereotype 1, black men do behaviour. Because I know a lot of black and brown men who don't want to do behaviour and they've left the system because they've been stereotyped as pastoral leaders. Stereotype 2, take 2 women who are English teachers, the white woman teaches English and the black woman teaches media studies. Do you want to just talk to the kind of the damage that these stereotypes do, please, in the system, Amy?
The damage is that it restricts people and it makes people think that they can only do one type of thing. It's like there was a previous speaker who said about athletes and rap stars, I think with this during this session, and it creates tunnel vision. I can only be that one thing, and it reinforces that. And I think for me, the stereotype threat was, you know, thinking, I have to kind of cover or calm down who I am, or because I'm afraid of how I might come across, and then that holding me back. It can be damaging to your own mental health because it makes you feel like people will only see you that way, and it takes a lot to try and break out of that mold, that expectation, and to go beyond that. But you know, we have to represent different types of people in different types of jobs, you know, black women engineers, or you know, and it can be anything. But it's just about trying to show that diversity in those roles, to show people that they can actually be that, you can achieve it. And there's nothing wrong if you are a black male teacher who does want to do pastoral work. If you have interest elsewhere, that needs to be nurtured by your leadership.
Thank you, Amy. Brilliant wrap up there. Question for Dennis. Dennis, I tagged you in something during the week about the self-promotion bias and how women and people of colour need to try that bit harder to get the promotions, and they tend to veer away from self-promotion. Would you mind just sharing kind of like how you've navigated that in the system, but also outside of the system?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think whenever, regardless of your diverse background, whenever you go to put your head above the parapet or step out, it really can feel, you really can feel exposed. And I think that the approach that I certainly take is to, there's enough negative thoughts within myself already. So I'm going to ignore the negative that comes from elsewhere. And there are only certain people in my life that have the privilege of offending me and, really knocking me off track. And they're my closest family and friends and my loved ones. So I think sometimes we can worry too much about, well, what if somebody doesn't like it? Or what if somebody says this? And they may well do, but we should continue regardless. So I think my approach has come from that word authentic. So trying to be who I should be, trying to kind of cultivate the strengths that I have, and then just taking small steps. And as we take small steps, it might be involved going to a conference like I did with this conference back in January. And then the next time the conference is on, you might volunteer to do something at the conference. And, thank you. I've modeled that really well, Hannah. So step by step, and rather than feeling like it's this big leap and I'm going to, launch this whole big thing, just speak to somebody about it, and then speak to somebody else about it, and then maybe write a blog about it, and step by step. And as we do that, suddenly those just things become normal.